Hey guys, tonight we're tracing the misty outlines of a man whose name rarely made the news, yet whose influence soaked into the port stones of Sicily like the salt wind itself. Picture the sleepy town of Barcelona, Pozzo di Gotto in the 1990s, a quiet coastal place that wears its history like a comfortable old coat. By day, it's all fishing nets, citrus-scented lanes, and the clink of espresso cups. But by night, that's when the real power stirs, in alley shadows, in nods exchanged beneath flickering lamplight, in conversations that never quite reach the ears of outsiders. Salvatore Mancuso isn't famous, not in the traditional sense. He doesn't crave the attention of Rome or Palermo. He doesn't bark orders like the gangsters in American movies. He's not a lion. He's a shadow that passes behind you when you think you're alone. And he's about to show you what it means to rule with nothing but silence and consequence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's see how far this story drifts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He stands at the dock in Milazzo, motionless beneath the hanging haze of ship exhaust and salt spray. The freighter from Tunisia is due at any moment, its belly stuffed with cargo so mundane it might lull the authorities to sleep. Crates of preserved fish, rolls of vinyl, maybe even a few vintage Vespas bound for collectors in Messina. But buried deep within that manifest is something else. Not drugs, not guns, information. Salvatore Mancuso isn't interested in blood anymore. Not directly. He's moved past the things that spatter walls and call down sirens. These days, he trades in leverage. He collects it like other men collect stamps, meticulously, obsessively. What comes off the freighter tonight isn't explosive, but it will quietly shift ownership of 3 warehouses and a municipal contract for pavement resurfacing. That's how he moves now, in shadows cast by paperwork. At the edge of the pier, a young dock worker flicks a cigarette into the sea, unaware that 2 pairs of eyes are watching from the shadows. One belonging to a tired customs agent already paid off, the other to a man in a tan windbreaker who is not. Salvatore says nothing. He adjusts his collar against the breeze and walks. He walks past the moored vessels with names like Maria della Luna and Rosa Bianca. He walks past men laughing over grappa, past the local priest holding a bag of groceries, past a bakery that will be raided in 6 weeks for smuggling messages in sacks of flour. In Barcelona, Pozzo di Gotto, everyone smiles, everyone nods, but no one truly sees. Back in the 1960s, the Barcellonese mafia was barely a whisper compared to the roars from Palermo and Corleone. But Salvatore, he saw the vacuum of noise as an advantage. Where others sought visibility and power plays, he nurtured anonymity. He never wanted to be feared, just never underestimated. He wasn't always this quiet. In his youth, Salvatore ran with boys who stole motorbikes and snuck into weddings for free wine. He wore denim, he laughed loudly, he got into fistfights behind billiard halls. But the ocean changed him. Long hours casting nets off the coast taught him that patience feeds you more than speed. The way the tide comes in slowly, but always returns. He found that rhythm and never forgot it. That's how he builds power now, like a tide pulling loyalties 1 grain of sand at a time. Tonight, in a small apartment above a shuttered ice cream parlor, a former municipal secretary will open a drawer and find an envelope. Inside, 1 photograph, 1 map, and a note that simply reads, Choose your loyalty. He'll think it's a prank. He'll pour a grappa and go to bed. By morning, his cousin in Palermo will receive a phone call offering him a job at the Department of Waste Management. The cousin will accept, and the secretary will say nothing, just like everyone else. Mancuso's brilliance lies not in his crimes, but in the fact that no one ever calls them that. A rezoning request, a construction delay, a misplaced permit. By the time anyone traces the problem, the water's already receded. Many people still think that Salvatore was simply lucky, born in the right town, at the right time, under the right constellation of dirty stars. But if you look closer, you realize he made the luck. He cultivated it like olives, slowly, season by season, until even the roots knew his name. At the far end of the dock, an old man is repairing a fishing net. His hands tremble slightly, not from age, but from the years he spent transporting packages across the Tyrrhenian Sea. He once made the mistake of asking too many questions. Now, he speaks only of fish and weather. Salvatore passes him. Their eyes meet for 1 second too long. The net slips from the old man's fingers. "Buonasera," Salvatore murmurs, the only word he's spoken in an hour. And then he's gone, back into the alleys where the breeze can't reach. Back to the streets where everyone knows him but pretends not to. Back to the house with the lemon tree in the courtyard and a dog that never barks. Barcelona Pozzo di Gatto is asleep, and he prefers it that way. He first learns the rules not from men in suits or whispered threats in alleyways, but from old women hanging laundry across narrow stone alleys. In Barcelona, secrets don't hide. They blend, folded into daily routine like sugar into espresso, stirred just enough to disappear. The unwritten code, the one they all live by, isn't passed down in initiation ceremonies or grand speeches. It's absorbed through silence, through careful glances, through what isn't said over morning pastries. Salvatore, barely 15, watches his mother wave at a man with a limp who always carries his bread wrapped in 2 layers of cloth. She never says his name, but every time he passes, she lowers her voice. That's lesson 1. Don't name shadows. He takes a job helping unload citrus from dusty trucks in a warehouse that smells perpetually of damp cardboard and orange oil. The foreman, a square-shouldered man called Vito, wears his shirt unbuttoned to the navel and never counts the crates himself. Vito always nods twice before leaving. If he nods once, something is wrong. If he nods 3 times, someone is watching. Salvatore picks that up by week 2. By week 3, he's the one moving crates with just the right rhythm, not too slow to draw suspicion, not too fast to seem ambitious. There's another boy on the shift, Alfio, a loud-mouthed cousin from Messina. Alfio boasts about women, about nights in Palermo, about running numbers for someone with real power. Salvatore doesn't respond, just smiles the same small smile each time. One night, Alfio doesn't show up. The next morning, Vito nods just once. That's lesson 2. Don't talk too much, even if you think you're winning. In Barcelona's labyrinthine back streets, Salvatore studies a code of conduct more complex than any law book. There's a right way to cross a square, a right cafe to sit in depending on the day, a right time to speak about construction permits, and a wrong time to mention the word Rome. He watches as old men pretend to argue over soccer while trading slips of paper beneath the table. He sees how the town's pharmacy always has 1 extra bottle of morphine, unregistered, wrapped in brown paper for a man who walks in every Wednesday at 3:14 p.m. The man never pays, never speaks, and never looks anyone in the eye. The pharmacist is never audited. The deeper Salvatore goes, the more the rules reveal themselves. It's not that anyone breaks the law, They just navigate around it like a seasoned driver weaving through potholes. You never deny the state. You simply render it unnecessary. At 17, Salvatore is invited to a baptism, not because he's close to the family, but because someone wants to see how he behaves. He arrives precisely on time, wears an ironed shirt, shakes the right hands, kisses no one twice, and speaks only when addressed. When the wine is passed around, he drinks with his left hand. Later, he'll learn that was the correct hand that day. His name starts to surface, not loudly, just in careful side glances. That Mancuso boy. He doesn't blink much, does he? They say. Polite. Too polite. By now, he's no longer lifting crates. He's arranging meetings, always in public, always just long enough to talk about the weather, or a mother's hip pain, or how the fish market is overpriced this year. But eyes shift, and contracts are reassigned, and a certain cousin from Milazzo ends up with a bar no one thought he could afford. The code evolves with him. It becomes muscle memory, a way of being. One day he sees a man get slapped in a restaurant. Not hard, not cruel, just once across the cheek. The man nods and leaves. No one else acknowledges it. The slap is justice for something Salvatore doesn't need to know. What matters is that it happened. He writes nothing down. He keeps no ledgers. If someone asks too directly, he shrugs. I just know people, he says. And it's true. Many people still think that the Sicilian mafia was built on fear and bloodshed. But in towns like Barcelona, it was built on rhythm. Quiet, calculated rhythm. Salvatore understands that better than most. He walks like he's already memorized every crack in the sidewalk. He smiles like he's rehearsed it under pressure. One evening, in a cafe where the chairs always face away from the windows, a man from Palermo stops mid-sentence. He realizes he's spoken out of turn, mentioned a name not meant for this town. The conversation changes instantly. Pastries appear. The barista drops a tray. Everyone pretends it didn't happen, except Salvatore. He watches. He files it away. That night, a package arrives at the Palermo man's hotel. It contains a single lemon and a strand of rosary beads. No note. The man leaves before breakfast. As the 1980s inch toward their end, Salvatore is already shaping the 1990s. Not with violence. Not yet. But with consistency. With the gentle, unyielding presence of someone who sees everything, says nothing, and always walks the same route home. People begin asking for his opinion. Not publicly, of course. Through intermediaries. Through glances and coffee orders. A shopkeeper wants to renovate. A friend wants to buy land. A relative wants to switch political parties. Salvatore gives no permission. Just a slight tilt of the head. An absence of refusal. And that's enough. He becomes the town's default filter. What passes through him is clean. What doesn't pass through doesn't happen. It's said he once prevented a stabbing with a loaf of bread. The man who intended the act found his front door bricked shut the next morning. On each brick was a word: pain, perdono, pace, bread, forgiveness, peace. He moved away the next week. By 22, Salvatore Mancuso is not feared, not even admired. He is known. Like fog, like damp stone, like the background hum of something old and necessary. No one invites him to weddings. He still shows up. There's a house just off Via Roma, painted pale green, where the scent of anchovies drifts through every open window and the tiles are always warm underfoot. It's where Salvatore Mancuso grew up. Between sea air and cigarette smoke, between his mother's whispered lullabies and his father's tired hands. They were a family not of power, but of endurance. His father, Domenico, was a fisherman, not the kind who sang in boats or drank with tourists, but the kind who woke before sunrise, who measured life in nets and the weight of the day's catch, and who knew that sometimes the best way to win a fight was not to throw a punch, but to make sure the opponent never showed up at all. Salvatore learns early that their family is both inside and outside the system, not noble, not criminal, something in between. His uncle, a stone mason, is rumored to have once paved a driveway for a judge and buried more than gravel beneath it. No one asks. Salvatore doesn't either. He just watches how people pause before speaking the uncle's name. He begins to live in two worlds. At school, he's quiet, courteous, unremarkable. He's the boy who sharpens his pencil without being told, who doesn't cheat but knows who does. The teachers call him polite. The girls call him a mystery. But they don't know about the other world, because after school, in the courtyard of the family home, men arrive who don't knock. Men with sun-leathered faces and careful eyes. They never stay long. They drink espresso in silence, nod to his father, and leave through the side gate. Salvatore pours their coffee. He doesn't ask their names. But later, his father quietly tells him, "The men who talk the least often carry the most." That sticks with him, more than any lesson from the nuns. He begins to collect habits, rituals. He never takes the same route twice in a week. He never sits with his back to a door. He never leaves a room without knowing who entered it last. And slowly, these small disciplines carve a kind of armor around him, not of arrogance, but of preparation. One afternoon, he sees something that changes him. He's 12. Walking home past the old butcher shop, he hears shouting behind the building. Curious, he steps off the path, weaving through a narrow alley where stray cats sun themselves on crates. He peers around the corner. Two men are arguing, not shouting, hissing. One holds a piece of paper, the other holds nothing. But Salvatore sees in his stance a quiet promise of violence. And then suddenly it stops. One man simply places a hand on the other's shoulder and says something too soft to hear. Whatever was on the paper is torn in half. The men nod. They leave together. He never finds out what it was about. But that's not what matters. What matters is that the man with nothing in his hands won. He doesn't mention it to anyone, but he thinks about it for weeks. That's when he understands. Control doesn't require force. It requires presence. By his early teens, Salvatore knows which doors to knock on and which to avoid. He knows that the barber on Via Garibaldi can stitch a wound as well as any nurse, and that the man who sells tomatoes at the market always keeps a second phone in his apron. He knows who drinks too much and who listens too well. He also knows what it means to owe someone a favor. One cold January morning, his younger sister, Lucia, slips on the church steps and breaks her arm. The local hospital says it'll be hours before a doctor sees her. Salvatore doesn't argue. He just walks outside, finds a payphone, and dials a number written on the inside of a cigarette box. The doctor arrives 10 minutes later. They never receive a bill. But 2 weeks later, the same doctor calls their house, asking if Salvatore's father knows anyone in the permit office. Nothing more is said, but the favor is clear, and quietly, it is granted. That's when Salvatore begins to understand his role, not as a player, but as a conduit, a relay point. People move through him. Problems come to him and leave resolved, without paperwork, without noise. He's not a gangster, not yet. He's a facilitator, a solvent for friction, a student of invisible currencies. And yet, even within his family there's tension. His mother, Maria, is a woman of deep faith. She lights candles for the saints and pretends not to notice when men with scars kiss her son on both cheeks. She hopes he'll become a lawyer, or maybe a priest, someone who wears clean shirts and uses his words for good. But Salvatore is already walking a path she doesn't recognize. And though he still bows his head at dinner, crosses himself at Mass, and helps her carry groceries, his eyes grow quieter each year. Less curious, more calculating. One night, over pasta and clams, his father asks him, "Do you know what a shadow is, Turi?" Salvatore shrugs. "It's not just the absence of light," Domenico says. "It's the shape of something real. A shape people fear, even if they can't see the thing casting it." Salvatore nods. He understands. After that, he starts going out at odd hours. Not far. Just enough to learn how the town breathes after dark. He notices which windows stay lit after midnight, which cars are moved without reason, which shops never open on the first Tuesday of each month. He begins to read people like ledgers, debits and credits of behavior, and slowly, instinct replaces instruction. There's a girl, Francesca, who sells pastries at the corner cafe. She likes him, offers him extra biscotti with his coffee. He accepts, smiles, and never leads her on, because he knows she's the niece of a man with loud opinions and weak resolve. And weak resolve is dangerous. Salvatore isn't cruel, he's careful. By the time he turns 18, the neighborhood watches him more closely than he watches them. Mothers pull their children gently aside when he walks by, not out of fear, but deference. Shopkeepers nod before he nods. Policemen greet him, but never stop to chat. He is becoming what his father hinted at, a shadow, but one with form, one with weight. Many people still believe that mafiosi are born through blood rituals and whispered oaths, but in truth, some are born quietly, with no ceremony, no violence, just 100 small choices, each more precise than the last, until suddenly they're no longer a boy, but something else entirely, something you don't cross. The Sicilian coast smells of brine, diesel, and the quiet resignation of men who've worked the sea too long. It's in this mix of salt and sun and ancient rhythm that Salvatore Mancuso learns his next set of lessons. Not from books, not even from men, but from the land and the sea themselves. After all, Barcellona Pozzo di Gatto is a place where nature has its own tempo. Waves don't crash here. They roll, smooth and slow, brushing the jetties like a lullaby. Even the wind is patient, drifting through olive groves and crumbling walls, carrying whispers older than the mafia itself. Salvatore begins taking long walks alone, always at dawn, not for meditation or peace, but for observation. In these quiet hours, the town reveals itself. A bakery always receives its flour earlier than others. Strange, considering its modest sales. A fisherman repaints his boat every month, but never sets sail. A mechanic with no customers somehow expands his garage. These aren't coincidences, they're signals. He begins to understand that in Barcelona, appearances are currency. One's role is not defined by title, but by perception. If a man looks busy, no one asks why his books don't balance. If a woman keeps her windows spotless, no one wonders what conversations happen in the cellar. One morning, near the old salt flats, Salvatore watches two men argue over a piece of land barely large enough for a garden. The younger one is loud, gesturing with hands that shake. The older is silent, calm, holding a small stone in one palm as if it anchors him. When the shouting ends, it's the older man who walks away with the deed. Salvatore never forgets the stone. That same week, he's invited, subtly, to assist with a problem. An older cousin of his has invested in a shipment of imported appliances, really just rebranded goods skimmed off containers in Naples. The paperwork doesn't match. The bribes aren't enough. And now, a regional customs official is making noises that suggest he'd like a promotion or a scandal. Salvatore listens to the story in silence, then asks one question. What's his son studying? The cousin blinks. Law, I think. In Catania. Salvatore nods once. The next day, the official receives a call from an academic board suggesting his son be considered for a generous scholarship. No strings attached, just recognition of his potential. 2 days later, the shipment clears. That's how Salvatore begins using the lessons of the coastline. Patience, tides, small interventions at the right moment. Not brute force, influence, timing. He doesn't call in favors. He deposits goodwill like coins in a deep well and waits for the right moment to lower the bucket. The sea teaches him something else too. Silence is never truly empty. Beneath the surface, 1,000 things stir. Crabs in the sand, fish in schools, debris swept along by currents no eye can follow. So too with Barcelona. Under its slow rhythm, a network grows. Whispers passed between stonemasons and store clerks, between truck drivers and nuns. And increasingly, the whispers echo his name. He becomes a question that hovers in every room. Has Salvatore heard about this? Should we ask Salvatore first? He never asks for this role. He just absorbs it. Meanwhile, he builds a network not of soldiers, but of storytellers. Men who know how to change a narrative in a single sentence. Women who bake cakes for police captains' birthdays while delivering messages inside the frosting. Children who know not to speak names, but to draw chalk symbols on the steps near the piazza when trouble is coming. It's said that once a rival tried to test him. A man from Augusta, recently transferred to Milazzo, started asking questions, loudly, about shipping routes, about who's really in charge here. He even tried to meet with Salvatore directly, sent a bouquet of orchids, a bottle of French cognac. Salvatore declined, politely. But the man didn't take the hint. So one afternoon, the rival's prized Alfa Romeo is found parked at a strange angle in front of a retirement home. Nothing missing, no damage, just moved, impossibly, confusingly. During the 15 minutes he was inside the barber shop, he never finds out who did it, but the message is clear. Within a week, he requests reassignment. Salvatore, for his part, never mentions the incident. Not even when Vito, the aging foreman turned cafe regular, chuckles over his espresso and mutters, "Wasn't that a lovely parking job, eh?" He just smiles. There's a myth that begins to form around him in those years, that he can move the sea, a saying among dock workers, for when a container disappears from a manifest without a trace. But of course, it's not magic. It's diligence. It's the 23 favors quietly returned. It's the 2 priests who owe him blessings. It's the single mother whose son now plays midfield for the youth squad because Salvatore once paid for his cleats. People repay debts more loyally than they fear punishment. He never carries a weapon. That's not his way. But he does carry a pen. A small black Mont Blanc, inherited from a family friend who died mysteriously in 1982. Salvatore never says why he uses it, but every contract, every note, every silent signature bears its ink. One day, a childhood friend, Gianni, asks him, "Turi, don't you get tired of always watching, always calculating?" Salvatore pauses, then replies, "Only when people stop listening." By now, his presence is so baked into the routine of the town that even new faces absorb his name without introduction. The waiter at the trattoria automatically seats him by the back wall. The grocer overorders lemons in spring, knowing Salvatore prefers the first crop. A retired judge stops mailing his taxes because they're always somehow handled. Many people still think that organized crime thrives on chaos, but in Salvatore's world, it survives through stability. 1,000 details tuned like the gears of a Swiss watch. And when they move in harmony, no one hears the ticking. At night, when the wind rustles through the shutters and the sea sighs against the docks, Salvatore often stands in his courtyard, smoking in silence. Not brooding, just listening to the coast, listening to the town, listening for anything that sounds like the beginning of a ripple. Because ripples, left alone, become waves. Salvatore remembers the day his father finally told him the truth. Not with words, but with a glance, a gesture, and a silence that lasted longer than the pasta dinner they shared. It wasn't a confession. It was an inheritance passed like a slow nod at a funeral. The kind of understanding men in Barcelona don't write down, because they know wind and dust will carry it where it needs to go. It began with a knock. Just after dusk, the winter sky already dark and low, a figure appeared at their gate. Domenico rose without a word, motioned to Salvatore to stay seated, and stepped out into the courtyard. From the window, Salvatore could only see part of the exchange. 2 men, one older with a cap in his hand, the other standing stiffly, watching the lemon tree. No raised voices, no arguments, just that eerie stillness of something important being decided. When his father returned, he didn't speak for several minutes. He poured a glass of red wine, sat heavily at the table, and began to eat again, but slower this time. Every movement measured. Finally, he said, "That man, he used to serve with me in the Navy. Lost his brother last year. Said he owed me a truth." Salvatore waited. His fork hovered in midair. "There's going to be a change," Domenico continued. "Some people think they can move pieces without asking the board." A pause. Then the smallest shrug. But the sea doesn't forget who steered the boat when the storm hit. Salvatore didn't ask for details. He just nodded, filed it away in the archive of things that would shape his future. That night, he lay awake, thinking of what it meant to owe someone a truth. To carry secrets so heavy they warped the very air in a room. And more than anything, he thought of the way his father had spoken, not like a man worried, but like one resigned to being part of something older than himself. It was then that Salvatore stopped being a student of the system and began to feel himself part of its architecture. The next morning, he left the house before dawn, not for a walk this time, but with purpose. He went to the port, not to watch the ships, but to speak to an old contact from the Coast Guard who now worked security for a private logistics firm. They had coffee in a rusted trailer that smelled of seaweed and diesel. Salvatore asked only one question. If someone were to redirect a shipment, something quiet, something local, what's the best hour to do it? The man raised an eyebrow, studied Salvatore, then scribbled 3 numbers on a napkin and slid it across the table. Salvatore didn't look at it right away. He sipped his coffee, smiled politely, and left a 5,000 lyre note on the counter. He never mentioned it again. But 2 weeks later, a warehouse fire accidentally exposed a cache of mislabeled fertilizer that wasn't fertilizer at all. And a certain loud-mouthed municipal planner quietly moved his family to Florence. From that point on, Salvatore became known for what didn't happen. No shouting, no threats, no trails. He was the space between 2 headlines. The unreported reason why a vote never took place. Why a contract was never signed. Why a journalist's car wouldn't start on the morning of a crucial interview. He didn't punish, he reminded. One afternoon, he was approached by a man named Bellucci, a mid-level operator from Messina, with ambitions bigger than his mouth could handle. Bellucci came with an offer: joint control of a distribution line involving consumer electronics, rerouted from Tunisia through Crotone, skimming import taxes. Salvatore listened. Then he said only, "Why would you bring this to me instead of to the people who handle that sort of thing?" Bellucci smiled, oily and overeager. "Because you, Mancuso, you're the thread. You connect things." Salvatore stirred his espresso once. Threads are useful, but they snap when pulled too hard. The deal never happened. 2 months later, Bellucci's name appeared in a corruption inquiry. He was never arrested, but also never seen in Barcelona again. From this point, Salvatore becomes not just a presence, but a pressure, the kind you feel in your chest before a storm. His father, though aged and increasingly tired, watches with something like pride and something like fear. He knows what his son has become. A shadow, yes, but now one with reach, one with... There's an unspoken rule in Barcelona. If something's about to happen, it has already passed through Salvatore's mind. Maybe not decided by him, but weighed, considered, balanced against consequences. Like a scale in a butcher's shop, always zeroed before and after each measure. And that's what makes him dangerous. Not that he reacts, but that he anticipates. He once prevents a revenge killing by sending the grieving brother of the victim a basket of fresh fish. That might seem absurd to an outsider, but the fish, wrapped in paper from a very specific stall, carry a message. The brother understands. His pain is noted, his honor acknowledged, and his restraint appreciated. Nothing more is said, and nothing more needs to be. Many people still think that men like Salvatore are defined by the violence they unleash. But those who live in places like Barcelona know the truth. It's the violence they prevent that earns them the real power. It's during this period that his name begins to spread further, not just among dock workers and local business owners, but among clerics, lawyers, even school administrators. His presence isn't announced, but everyone knows when he's in the room. He walks like someone who doesn't need to explain himself, like someone who's memorized every possible outcome and only chooses the one that leaves no residue. A visiting bishop once mistakes him for a local councilman. Salvatore smiles, nods respectfully, and says, "No, Excellenza, I'm just someone who helps people get where they're going." And truly, that's all he claims to be. A guide, a coordinator, but everyone else knows better. They know that when Salvatore's father finally falls ill, it is not the doctor who gets him into the best clinic, but the quiet call Salvatore makes to an old friend in Catania. They know that when the city's power flickers during a heat wave, it's Salvatore who sends 2 men with engineering degrees and fake badges to inspect the station before anyone else. He never asks for payment. He doesn't need to. Gratitude has a long shelf life in Sicily, and when his father dies, not suddenly, but with dignity, in a clean white bed with clean white sheets, Salvatore doesn't weep. He holds his mother's hand. He helps her to her feet. And then he walks alone to the seawall at Milazzo. There, with the salt wind in his face and the sound of gulls overhead, he lights a cigarette, takes one long drag, and says nothing at all. But from that day on, he wears his father's old jacket, faded, frayed at the cuffs, but always clean. Because now, the shadow doesn't belong to the man who cast it. It belongs to the son who stepped inside it. The wind shifts over the docks one spring morning in 1990, and with it comes a man wrapped in the scent of foreign tobacco and worn leather. No name is given, none is needed. The town knows him only as Il Muratore, the bricklayer. His business isn't construction, though he speaks like someone who's laid foundations deeper than bedrock. He comes from Catania, where streets wind tighter and mouths stay shut for different reasons. He arrives with a problem. Not his own, of course. Men like him never carry their own burdens. But he brings the kind of issue that can't be solved with money or threats. It involves an investor, a warehouse, and a shipment of washing machines that never arrived. Behind those missing appliances is a much heavier shipment that nobody, not even Palermo, wants to touch. And yet, he's here, in Barcelona, to speak with someone who's never appeared in newspapers, who holds no official rank, and whose address is known only to people who never write things down. He's here to speak with Salvatore Mancuso. They meet, not in a back room or basement, but under a lemon tree in the courtyard of an abandoned convent. The bricklayer arrives alone, dressed like a schoolteacher, with one pant leg slightly frayed and a folder tucked under his arm. Salvatore offers him a coffee without asking how he takes it. He already knows. 1 sugar, no milk. Biscotti left untouched. The conversation lasts less than 10 minutes. Salvatore listens more than he speaks. He flips through the folder briefly, then sets it aside. Instead of addressing the paperwork, he asks a question about a particular dock number in Augusta. A seemingly unrelated detail that makes the bricklayer stiffen, just slightly. Then, Salvatore says, the real issue isn't the missing machines, it's the second driver, the one who wasn't registered. The bricklayer leans back, says nothing, but his eyes narrow. Because that piece of information wasn't in the folder, he realizes then that Salvatore already knows, not just about the shipment, but about the people involved, the political favors being traded, the 2 construction permits that were filed under shell companies 3 weeks earlier in Ragusa. Even the fact that the second driver's real name is Gaspare Inzerillo, a former informant turned courier. This is how Salvatore solves problems, not by shouting or shooting, but by knowing, by walking 3 moves ahead and waiting for the pieces to arrive at the place he already occupies. He doesn't offer solutions. He simply asks, "Would you like me to make a call?" And when the bricklayer nods, that's it. The driver is found 2 days later in a pensione near Tropea, alive but shaken, with a broken wrist and a new passport under a name he doesn't recognize. He tells the clerk he's leaving the country, and he does. The appliances? They're recovered in a different port, registered under a reissued manifest. No headlines, no arrests, just a quiet return to business as usual. That's how Salvatore operates. Not with presence, but with pressure. Word of this meeting doesn't travel far. Only a handful of men even know it happened. But for those who matter, it's confirmation. Barcelona is no longer just a side route. It's a nexus. And the man pulling the strings isn't Palermo or Naples or Rome. It's Mancuso, the man with no title, the man with eyes like tidewater. Shortly after the town shifts again, the local bank starts approving loans faster for the right people. A city inspector retires early. A new cafe opens near the post office, operated by a cousin of a man who once washed dishes in Salvatore's mother's kitchen. None of these things seem connected, and yet the bricklayer returns once more that summer. Not with a problem this time, but with a proposition. He wants to reroute a portion of a new smuggling line through the old rail hub outside Barcelona. Just a few crates infrequently, nothing flashy. The kind of cargo that's legal everywhere except Italy. Chemicals for agriculture, some tech components, rare liquor brands. It's quiet, clean, profitable. Salvatore says no, not because it's dangerous, but because it's inefficient. He's built his network on predictability, not risk, on quiet favors, not flashy deals. And most of all, he doesn't want Barcelona to become a target. "You'll attract Rome," he says simply, "and they don't blink as slowly as Palermo." The bricklayer protests. Salvatore doesn't raise his voice. He just lets the silence stretch long enough for the man to realize the conversation is over. They finish their coffee. The bricklayer never returns again. Instead, his cousin from Catania mysteriously appears in Barcelona 2 months later, asking about local real estate. Quietly, he buys a small orchard. And a month after that, a produce export company registers a new trade route through Tunisia. Salvatore is not involved, officially, but the export company uses a shipping firm run by his old classmate's nephew. And the orchard's water rights are managed by a council where Salvatore's name is never spoken aloud, but where every vote lands his way. He remains just one step removed, always just out of focus. That's his genius. He never breaks the law. He walks around it so artfully that the law doesn't even notice it's been bypassed. A retired judge once says over dinner in Messina, "There's a man in Barcelona who could reorganize parliament with nothing but a pencil and 4 favors." Everyone laughs, but no one asks the man's name. Many people still think that regional power in Sicily belongs to those with armies of men, with coffers full of cash. But Salvatore's empire is different. It's built on leverage, loyalty, long memories, and one quiet refusal to let someone else control the rhythm of his town. He keeps walking, keeps watching, and whenever someone new arrives, asking questions or flashing money, the old women who sweep their doorsteps in the early mornings will shake their heads and mutter, "He doesn't like change, and that will be enough." At the far end of Corso Umberto, tucked between a shuttered locksmith and a bakery that sells more coffee than bread, sits a humble barber shop. The striped pole hasn't spun in years. The bell above the door sticks. But inside, beneath the buzzing hum of fluorescent lights and the ever-present smell of aftershave, lies a different kind of ledger, not one of debts or credits, but of people. The barber's name is Enzo, and he's been trimming the town's hair and hearing its secrets for over 40 years. He says little, listens more, and never changes the price, even as inflation rears its head. For Enzo, consistency is its own kind of power. Salvatore has been visiting since he was a boy. He never books an appointment. He just appears, always on Tuesdays, always at noon, always the same seat, the one furthest from the window. Enzo trims his hair in silence, occasionally flicking ash into a tin he swears was once a World War II ration can. But this Tuesday is different. Salvatore enters, nods once, and sits. Enzo begins the ritual. Cape, water, scissors. But there's a subtle pause as he reaches beneath the counter. When he lifts the comb, there's a folded sheet of paper tucked between the teeth. He hands it to Salvatore wordlessly, like passing a tissue to someone about to sneeze. Salvatore reads it with no change in expression. It's not typed. It's not even written in a familiar hand. But what it contains is unmistakable. A list of names, 4 of them crossed out. 1 still clean. And next to each, a number. Large, even by his standards. This is Enzo's way of bookkeeping. His way of saying, you should know these men have debts, not just to money, but to you. It's unclear who wrote the original note. That's the point. Information in Barcelona moves like smoke, visible only when the light hits it right. Salvatore doesn't ask where it came from. He doesn't need to. The fact that Enzo passed it at all is the real message. One name stands out. Luigi Farella, a mid-tier port coordinator with a gambling habit and a nose for double-dealing. Farella had once pleaded for a favor. His wife's medical expenses, quietly covered by a distant foundation, Salvatore arranged through a third cousin in Ragusa. There had been no formal expectation of return. just the implicit understanding. Loyalty is a form of interest, but the note suggests otherwise. Luigi, it seems, has been skimming. Small amounts, irregular, but enough. Salvatore doesn't react, doesn't curse. He simply tucks the paper into his pocket, lets Enzo finish the cut, pays in exact cash, and exits without a word. By sunset, the town already feels different, because Salvatore has never tolerated betrayal. Not because it angers him, but because it destabilizes. And Barcelona, in his hands, is a place of balance. Even its corruption runs on a schedule. He doesn't summon Luigi. That would be too direct, too loud. Instead, he attends a small dinner hosted by the Regional Agriculture Council. A dry affair with watery wine and forgettable speeches. Luigi is there, seated near the back, laughing too loudly, as always. During dessert, Salvatore walks past Luigi's table, doesn't stop, doesn't greet him, just walks. And that, in Barcelona, is louder than any slap. Luigi freezes. The blood drains from his face, because he understands what wasn't said. 3 days later, Luigi resigns, claims a family emergency, transfers quietly to a less significant role in Syracuse. No one stops him, but they all notice. And that's the point. The barber's ledger isn't a threat. It's a map of where the trust begins to crack. Salvatore uses it like a fisherman watching the tide, pulling in his nets before the storm. But it's not always betrayal that concerns him. Sometimes it's desperation. In the same folder was another name, not crossed out. A man named Carlo Di Penta, an old friend, once a loyal intermediary between suppliers and distributors, recently widowed. His name appears on the list not for betrayal, but for insolvency. He's overextended, a loan gone bad, a mistake of pride. This, Salvatore handles differently. Late one evening, Carlo finds an envelope under his door. Inside, a single photograph of him as a young man, laughing beside his wife, their hands dusted with flour in a bakery long since closed. No words, just the photo. Carlo understands. The next morning, he goes to the town notary and transfers ownership of his small warehouse to a cooperative linked quietly to Salvatore's holdings. In return, his debts vanish. His home remains untouched, and a small bouquet appears on his wife's grave that Sunday. There are rules, but there is mercy too. This is what makes Salvatore different from the others who tried to rule these quiet corners of Sicily. He doesn't hoard favors. He recycles them, keeps the ecosystem balanced. Many people still think that organized crime is all about territory, guns, envelopes stuffed with cash. But in Barcelona, the real power lives in places like Enzo's shop, in folds of paper passed between teeth of a comb, in glances held for a second too long. Because in this town, a barber's nod is worth more than a notary's stamp. And Salvatore, he is the sum of all those nods. He walks the market that Friday morning, nodding to stall owners, chatting about the heat, sampling blood oranges like any other patron. But every step, every glance is measured. A vendor hands him a peach, overripe, soft, sweet. No charge. Salvatore smiles, because he knows the vendor's daughter just passed her university exams in Palermo. And he knows the man she interned under is a friend of a friend. And he knows that one day, that girl might be in a position to help someone else. It's not paranoia, it's preparedness. That evening, he returns to Enzo. The shop is empty, the sun low. He places a bottle of Amaro on the counter. Nothing fancy, just a thank you. You keep track, he says quietly. Enzo shrugs. The town talks, I just listen. Salvatore leans in, smiles. Then keep listening. And if it ever stops talking, let me know. Enzo nods. And the bell above the door sticks as Salvatore walks out, just as it always does. The night air in Barcelona has a strange way of carrying news. It doesn't shout, it murmurs, moves softly through the orange groves, weaves into the breeze that skims along the rooftops, and settles into ears that know how to listen. It's on such a night that Salvatore Mancuso learns something he already suspects. The wind is shifting in Messina. A call comes, routed through 2 intermediaries and bounced off a bar phone in Palermo to make it seem less urgent than it is. But Salvatore knows urgency doesn't announce itself. It hides in the effort people make to sound casual. The caller is Vito. Not the old foreman from the citrus warehouse, but a different Vito. A customs officer turned professional observer. His job now is to notice things, subtle things, like when a patrol schedule changes, like when a container is checked twice, not once, or when someone new walks the dock, asking old questions. There's movement, Vito says, from Naples. Salvatore doesn't ask what kind. He just says grazie and hangs up. It begins with the ships. Mid-sized freighters docking not at the main port, but at the smaller wharfs, privately owned, less documented. The captains speak little Italian. The manifests are written in English, French, sometimes Romanian. On paper, it's all legitimate. Farm equipment, canned goods, building materials, but the rhythm is wrong. They're unloading too quickly, leaving too soon. And most of all, too quietly. Salvatore doesn't panic. He doesn't call meetings or dispatch men. Instead, he sits for 3 days at the same cafe table by the piazza, sipping espresso and reading the same newspaper front page over and over. And people come to him. A dock worker mentions a new supervisor he doesn't recognize. A bakery delivery man says his route has been redirected. Someone else now receives the early crates. A teenage cousin jokes that too many suitcases have wheels, but no travelers. Each puzzle piece is minor, but Salvatore knows when the air hums like this, something's pushing in. It's not the Cosa Nostra, not directly. It's the Sistema, a mesh of operators from Campania, Calabria, and points east. Smugglers turned middlemen, trying to test the edges of his territory like a dog sniffing at a closed door. He understands the play. They think Barcelona is soft now, that its silence means vacancy, that the shadow has faded. So he makes a decision. One night, Salvatore walks to the port. No entourage, no fanfare. He takes the long route through the old fishing quarters, past crumbling murals and shuttered shops. The air smells of engine oil and fresh tar. At the far end of the dock, a cargo supervisor stands with a clipboard, making notes under dim floodlights. He's not local. His shoes are too clean. Salvatore approaches and says, "You're in my town." The man doesn't look up, doesn't respond. So Salvatore picks up a pebble and gently taps it against the clipboard, knocking it from the man's hands. Now there's eye contact. Salvatore leans in. "You know who I am?" The man nods cautiously. "Then you know I don't ask twice." He turns and walks away, never raising his voice, never looking back. The next morning, the ship departs early, without unloading. 2 others follow in the next week, but one doesn't. One stays. And that's the problem. A name begins to surface. Matteo Rizzo. Young, ambitious, connected to Naples, claims to be setting up logistics for an export firm. What he's really doing is testing Salvatore's reach. Rizzo rents an office near the station, hires locals, moves around town with polite smiles and small bills for tips. But he makes one mistake. He schedules a meeting at the same cafe Salvatore uses. That's not aggression, that's arrogance. And arrogance in Barcelona is the most dangerous trait. Salvatore doesn't confront him, doesn't even acknowledge him. Instead, he invites a priest, Don Pietro, a childhood friend now serving in Messina, to speak at a local school about morality and economics. The event draws a small crowd: parents, teachers, curious passers-by. Rizzo is there, watching from the edge. During the Q&A, a boy asks a question. "What's the difference between a business and a racket?" Don Pietro smiles, looks straight at Rizzo. "A business leaves the town better than it found it. A racket takes, then paints the door as if it was never there." Later that evening, Rizzo finds the tires on his rental car slashed, not sloppily, but neatly, with precision. A folded napkin is tucked under the windshield wiper. It reads, "You're not the first. The car is gone by morning. But Salvatore knows this isn't the end. Only the first ripple. There will be more." The quiet stability of Barcelona draws opportunists like moths to candlelight, so he reinforces. He visits 3 people in one day. First, an accountant who once audited construction permits for Palermo, but now tends bees in the countryside. Salvatore listens to a long story about pollen before slipping a request into the conversation. Just enough to prompt action, not alarm. Second, a woman who owns a funeral home and also controls the lease to a warehouse conveniently located near the freight yard. She receives a donation that same week from an anonymous benefactor to expand her services. Third, a schoolteacher whose brother works for a telecom firm. Suddenly, 2 cameras go up near the small pier, officially for traffic flow, unofficially for Salvatore. No one speaks of any of it. But in the next month, the town changes. Shipping slows, meetings cancel. The cafe returns to its old rhythm. And Rizzo? He's last seen boarding a train for Naples with a suitcase, a bandaged hand, and a face set like wet cement. Many people still think Barcelona is quiet because it's small, but those who've seen Salvatore work know better. It's quiet because he listens harder than anyone else, and when the silence shifts, even slightly, he adjusts the entire town to match. Because Salvatore Mancuso doesn't need to raise his voice, he only needs to be heard. A pale moon hangs over Messina like a suspended breath, casting a silver sheen over the water and cobblestones. On this particular night, even the seagulls seem hushed, as if they too are listening for something. Salvatore Mancuso stands near the ferry terminal, hands in the pockets of his father's worn jacket. The ships drift in and out, quiet beasts in the dark. He's not here for a shipment. Not tonight. He's here because the pattern is off. For months, small shifts have unsettled the edges of his kingdom. Dock schedules that don't quite line up. Inventories that stutter, then resume as if nothing happened. Unfamiliar cars parked just outside the usual routes. These aren't accidents. They're warnings, dressed in coincidence. Tonight he's watching one of those cars, a dark blue sedan, nondescript except for the faint tremble in its rear axle. It's parked across from a warehouse that officially holds auto parts and unofficially holds silence. Inside that warehouse is something he doesn't like. Not because he doesn't know what it is, but because he doesn't know who placed it there. That is the real offense. For someone to stash something in his town without his knowledge isn't just bold, it's a declaration. The contents, cash, papers, or worse, don't matter. What matters is that the order didn't pass through him. So he waits. A figure appears, moves cautiously, unlocks the warehouse with a key he shouldn't have, opens the door, steps inside. Salvatore doesn't follow. He doesn't need to. By the time the figure re-emerges 20 minutes later, the sedan is gone. In its place stands a rusted Fiat, engine cold, keys missing. The figure panics, looks around, begins to pace. A phone rings. He answers, listens, then looks up and sees Salvatore standing exactly where he's always been. The man doesn't move. He knows what this means. Salvatore says only one thing. "You opened a door that wasn't yours." Then he walks away, disappearing into the dark like smoke through old stone. Back in Barcelona, a different kind of unease is brewing. Not from rivals, not even from within, but from outside, from government officials sent from Rome under the guise of infrastructure audits. At first, it seems routine. Clipboards, cameras, questions asked too cheerfully. But then come the interviews. Then the quiet offers. Then the whisper that a certain federal judge is interested in Barcelona's unusually low crime rate. This is what Salvatore dreads. Not the police, but the spotlight. He built his life on the assumption that shadows were safe. But now, someone's trying to turn on the light, so he counterbalances. First, he visits the local orphanage, quietly donating new beds, new heaters, a truckload of food. No names are attached. Just a note from a friend of the city. Then, he arranges a press feature, through back channels, on Barcelona's economic resilience. It highlights local businesses, downplays corruption, frames the town as a quiet model of Sicilian cooperation. The article is dry, forgettable, exactly as intended. And while the bureaucrats are busy interviewing bakery owners and asking about zoning laws, Salvatore moves with care. He identifies the weak points, not in the system, but in the people. The auditor from Rome, fond of card games and currently 3,000 euros in debt. The judge, estranged from his brother, who just so happens to be a consultant for a maritime firm linked to Salvatore's oldest contact in Reggio Calabria. He doesn't threaten. He simply lets these connections be discovered, like loose threads begging to be pulled. By the time the spotlight begins to dim, no one remembers why it was turned on in the first place, and Barcelona exhales. But there's still the matter of the warehouse. 2 weeks after the incident in Messina, Salvatore receives a letter, handwritten. No return address, no signature. Inside, a photograph, grainy, shot from a distance. It shows him, leaning against a wall, smoking, watching the warehouse. A message. Someone is watching the watcher. He studies the image, then burns it. Not out of fear, out of discipline. Many people still think Salvatore's calm is a mask, that beneath it lives a man boiling with violence, barely held in check. But they're wrong. His calm is the point. It is the source. It's the storm that never comes, because the clouds know better. Still, this photo is a breach, and breaches require response. So he shifts. He begins to rotate his routes through town, changes cafe seats, switches tailors. He has no driver, no official guard. But the people watching him won't find the same man twice in a week. He speaks to no one about the letter, except Enzo, at the barber shop, while Enzo trims away the edges of a haircut that doesn't need trimming. Salvatore says softly, "Someone sent me a picture." Enzo doesn't flinch, just nods. "Same paper as the last batch," he replies. Salvatore says nothing more, but now he knows. Whoever is watching is using a printing service inside Barcelona. That means they're close. He lets the silence do the rest. Later that week, a small print shop burns to the ground in what the fire chief calls an unfortunate wiring failure. No injuries, no arrests, no follow-ups, but one less camera feed on the street. It's not a war, not yet, but it's a new chapter. Because Barcelona is no longer just watching itself. Now the eyes come from beyond, from Rome, from Naples, from Palermo, from places that don't understand how quiet works. And Salvatore, he doesn't panic. He just starts listening harder. Barcelona Pozzo di Gatto isn't built for speed. Its streets coil around each other like rope left in sun and rain for too long, worn, familiar, and resistant to being straightened. The houses huddle together as if holding their breath, and the town itself seems to age in place. Nothing in Barcelona moves quickly, unless Salvatore Mancuso wants it to. Tonight he does, because somewhere beyond the hill that overlooks the port, a body has been discovered. Not an associate, not a rival, a civilian. A school janitor named Pietro Milazzo, 62 years old, fond of cardigans and soap operas, found face down in an irrigation canal with no witnesses, no known enemies, and no reason to be dead. And that's the problem. Salvatore sits at the table in his back courtyard, the old lemon tree casting fractured shadows across the bricks. There's no wind. Even the dogs are quiet. Across from him sits Donato, a wiry man with knuckles like river stones and a gaze that doesn't rest. He's been with Salvatore for years, not as muscle, not as consigliere, but as a kind of weather vane. When Donato gets uneasy, something is coming. Too clean, he mutters, referring to the body. No blood, Salvatore says. No bruising, Donato adds. No motive, Salvatore finishes. The silence that follows says everything else. Pietro Milazzo worked at a secondary school. No debts, no entanglements. He once fixed Salvatore's bicycle chain when Salvatore was 9. That's the only connection, which makes this personal. Not because Pietro mattered to the business, but because his death breaks the rules Salvatore has spent years cultivating. It's not just about who dies. It's about why and how, and most importantly, where. A civilian found in a ditch 2 kilometers from town sends a message. Not a declaration of war, a test. Someone is asking, will he respond? Salvatore does, but not with violence, not first. He starts with a visit to the school where Pietro worked, still shuttered for the week due to the investigation. Salvatore shows up unannounced, walks the halls like a man returning to a dream he once had. He pauses by a trophy case, looks at the plaques, smiles faintly. They haven't changed. Then he goes to Pietro's locker. It's not locked. Inside, a spare shirt, a bottle of ammonia, a tin of lozenges, and taped to the inside of the door, a photo of the 1993 faculty football team. Salvatore studies the photo, then takes it. That night, he sends a bottle of Chianti to a retired teacher now living in Cefalù, the man standing next to Pietro in the photo. Inside the wrapping is a note. Did he say anything unusual last week? The reply comes by courier 2 days later, a scribbled sentence on a paper napkin. He mentioned a new security guard at the gate, said he smelled of paint thinner. Salvatore leans back in his chair and exhales. Paint thinner. That detail isn't random. It's the kind of chemical scent you pick up if you're near certain types of explosives, or certain types of counterfeit printing operations, or, more likely, cheap rubber gloves used by people who clean up after themselves. Whoever planted the body wanted to be clean. Too clean. He begins to work backwards. The day before Pietro was found, a delivery truck broke down on Via Marina. 2 men spent 30 minutes under the hood, then drove off before a tow truck arrived. No police report, no repair order. 2 days before that, a florist received a massive wholesale shipment of lilies, more than she could sell in a month, paid in cash. The receipt address? A warehouse that doesn't exist. And the week before, a known money runner from Naples was spotted having coffee with a retired baronessa who now collects vintage menus, but once controlled half the shipping manifests between Reggio and Bari. Too many coincidences. Salvatore draws a map, not a digital one. He doesn't trust screens. On paper, lines, pins, ink, the old way. And the pattern emerges, not a threat, not even a rival, a probe. Someone, likely from Naples, is testing the boundaries, not looking to take over. Not yet. Just seeing how far they can step before someone taps them on the shoulder. Salvatore doesn't tap. He sends a pastry to a lawyer in Milazzo who once defended a smuggler and now handles real estate for offshore clients. The pastry is a cassata, perfect and bright, with a note tucked beneath the sugar flour. The janitor was loved. This is the only warning. The message is elegant, restrained. Sicilian. The lawyer delivers it. Salvatore doesn't need to ask. 2 days later, the delivery truck from Via Marina is found torched outside of Caltanissetta. No bodies, no headlines, just smoke. Salvatore doesn't celebrate. He doesn't even smile. He knows this isn't victory. It's containment. The larger threat is still out there, still watching, so he moves again. He holds a dinner, small, unannounced, for a handful of old friends. A fishmonger, a retired judge, a woman who used to manage the phone exchange before it was digital. They eat, drink, and laugh. But beneath the surface, information flows. Who's seen a new face? Who's had unusual inquiries? Who's received business offers that smell of cologne and promises? It all comes out. A man named Giorgio Romano, 38, no criminal record, but travels often, works consulting for a logistics firm that doesn't list its board of directors. He's been in and out of Barcelona for weeks, quiet, friendly, too friendly. Salvatore doesn't confront him. He follows him, or rather, he lets Donato follow him, quietly, carefully, until they confirm what Salvatore suspected. Romano isn't the architect, he's the scout, a man who maps the soil before someone else plants flags. Salvatore considers letting him go, letting him return to Naples with a false report. But then he remembers Pietro Milazzo, the man who fixed a boy's bicycle chain with calloused hands and said, "Ride like you mean it." Some lines can't be unbroken, so Romano vanishes, not publicly, not violently. He simply doesn't return to his hotel one night. His luggage is claimed by a woman with no name. His rental car is found near an abandoned vineyard. His phone pings once from a tower near Troina. Then nothing. The scout has been answered, and Barcelona falls quiet again. Many people still think Salvatore Mancuso is dangerous because of what he knows, but really he's dangerous because of what he remembers, and he remembers everything. The sky over Messina darkens not with storm clouds, but with questions. For weeks now, something has shifted, not in the streets, but in the silences between them. The air is thicker. Conversations end a beat too soon. Salvatore feels it like a fisherman feels a line tighten beneath the surface. He doesn't know what's down there, but he knows it's alive, and that brings him to the docks. Again, he doesn't walk openly this time. He arrives in the early hours, long before the fishermen cast their nets, when only the gulls argue over scraps and the sea smells sharp with salt and diesel. There's a crate, marked as furniture. It's not. Salvatore doesn't open it. He doesn't need to. What matters isn't what's inside. It's who sent it. And more importantly, who let it through. That's the betrayal. The crate was signed off by 2 customs officers. One of them, Ricci, is a man Salvatore has helped before. Paid his mother's hospital bills. Arranged school enrollment for his nephew. The kind of favor that buys silence for years, but silence like wine can sour. Donato is already waiting by the bollards, eyes scanning the port. It's from Trieste, he says. Came through under a rerouted manifest. Someone altered the shipping origin to make it look domestic. Salvatore nods. And Ricci approved it? Donato doesn't reply. He doesn't have to. What they're dealing with now isn't just opportunists. It's collaboration. Someone inside the system is offering handshakes where only nods should be. That breaks the rhythm. That invites chaos, and chaos is something Salvatore will not tolerate. He doesn't call Ricci, doesn't summon him. Instead, he writes a name, Ricci's daughter Marina, on a slip of paper and sends it in a blank envelope to the customs office. No threat, no message, just a name. Ricci gets the hint. 3 days later, he resigns, moves inland, claims stress. No one questions it. Because in Barcelona, people rarely say why something happens. They just accept that it did. But Salvatore is still watching, because if one man broke rhythm, others might follow. And they do. Not with violence, not with deals, but with questions. More people asking for access, requests for permits, foreign companies trying to lease warehouses, a sudden spike in interest from Palermo banks about regional growth opportunities. It's coordinated, and Salvatore sees the pattern. Someone is preparing to flood the system, not with force, but with volume. Overwhelm the local balance. Stack the deck until even Salvatore can't keep it all straight. That's when he takes a step no one expects. He opens his books, not the criminal ones, he doesn't keep those, but his legitimate fronts, the produce distributor, the courier service, the cleaning company. He begins paying taxes, real taxes, holding quarterly audits, welcoming regulators. Why? Because when the official records look spotless, no one thinks to look underneath. It's camouflage by compliance, and it works. The banks lose interest. The Palermo auditors get bored. The permits stall in bureaucracy. And the flood recedes before it begins. That's when Salvatore calls the cannoli meeting. It sounds ridiculous, but it's what the town will remember it as. 7 men, 3 women, all sitting at a long table in a trattoria known for overcooked pasta and undercooked gossip. No guards, no notes, just cannoli, coffee, and conversation. These are his touchstones. People from every angle of Barcelona's quiet power structure. A priest, a city planner, a butcher who speaks 5 languages. They've all benefited from Salvatore's system. But now, he needs something back. Too many eyes, he says softly between bites. If we keep them entertained, they'll forget to dig, so they agree to stage distractions. A minor scandal involving zoning laws. A charity gala with an embarrassing guest list. A fake political campaign for a fictional candidate, Franco Spizzico, who exists only on posters and in rumor. It works. Rome shifts its gaze, but Salvatore knows the attention will return. It always does. That's why he prepares the next phase. He meets with the Palermo connection, a politician with a tan too permanent and a handshake too polished. The man offers him an opportunity, shared access to a new export route through Malta. Legal, profitable, deniable. Salvatore declines. Too visible, he says. The man laughs. Always the ghost. Salvatore shrugs. Ghosts live longer. Later that night, walking home under the orange glow street lamps, Salvatore passes an old man selling roasted chestnuts. The same man from his childhood. The same patch of sidewalk. He buys 2 cones, even though he's not hungry. Because some rituals must be honored, he gives one to a child sitting nearby. The boy thanks him, smiles. Salvatore nods, keeps walking. But his mind is already turning, because he knows the game is changing. Faster players, smarter rivals, hungrier sharks. Many people still think Salvatore is a relic, that his quiet ways can't stand against modern aggression. But they forget, he doesn't stand. He moves, with the current, beneath the surface, like driftwood with teeth. And when he decides to strike, no one hears it coming. If Palermo is noise, then Barcelona is an echo, softer but more enduring. And Salvatore Mancuso? He's the space between them, walking a line that bends and shifts but never snaps. This week, that line brings him to a table he's avoided for years, the one with politicians at the other end. They don't call it that, of course. It's a working lunch, hosted in a coastal villa under renovation, where the curtains haven't been hung yet and the wine is poured too early. 3 men and a woman, all in tailored suits, none from Barcelona, smiling the way people do when they already know the price of something they haven't asked to buy. Salvatore arrives exactly 12 minutes late. Not enough to insult, just enough to remind them he doesn't belong to anyone's clock. The oldest of the men, Girolami, from the Department of Infrastructure, starts in immediately, praising the regional efficiency of your lovely town and how it's a model of how small municipalities can interface with development incentives. Salvatore stirs his espresso. Doesn't sip it. They talk roads. They talk tourism corridors. They talk about accessibility metrics. He listens. Then he speaks one sentence. Which permit do you already want me to sign? It's not sarcasm. It's a favor disguised as resignation. The woman, Lucia Rinaldi, an undersecretary for something too vague to remember, smiles. A logistics terminal. Nothing large. Just a node in a network. Salvatore nods once, waits. Then she adds, there will be foreign investment. You'll have say in staffing. But Rome will want quarterly reports. That's the truth. And the trap. Because quarterly reports mean auditors. And auditors don't look away. They ask. They stay. They talk. Salvatore sets his cup down. No. The word lands like a stone in still water. No, she repeats, too calm. He leans forward. If I wanted strangers in my town, I'd build a hotel. And then he stands. The meeting ends without goodbyes. 2 days later, his phone rings. A number he hasn't seen in 6 years. Senatore Amari, not a politician anymore. Just a man in a large house with too many balconies and not enough visitors. But once, he was the lever Salvatore used to shift permits for an agricultural cooperative that never actually harvested anything. Now Amari is a relic, but relics still echo in certain chambers. You embarrass them, the senator says, skipping pleasantries. They embarrass themselves, Salvatore replies. A pause, a breath. They'll send someone else. Someone who doesn't knock. I'll leave the door open. Amari chuckles, tired. Don't. They'll mistake it for invitation. Click. Salvatore prepares. Not with weapons, not with men, with signatures. He finalizes 3 charitable endowments, real ones. A scholarship for students in agriculture, a grant for independent fishermen, a fund for restoring the cathedral's crumbling frescoes. He gives Rome exactly what they claim to want: transparency, impact, beauty. And by doing so, he muddies the waters. If they move against him, they're moving against a man who feeds children and saves saints. It buys him time, because he knows the next player won't come smiling. They'll come cloaked. One night, an unmarked car glides through Barcelona, stops outside the municipal building, parks for 10 minutes, then leaves. That same night, the town hall server is quietly accessed. Not hacked, entered. Credentials used were official, recent, authorized, but Salvatore already knows, because the credentials belong to a secretary whose cousin owes 3 favors to a man in Reggio who talks too much when he drinks. So when the access occurs, a mirror system records every move. The files they looked at, land usage, water rights, communication contracts, not criminal files, but infrastructure. They're not after Salvatore's operations. They're after his platform. That's what rattles him. Not fear. He's beyond that. But disappointment. Because it means the game is no longer about respect. It's about leverage. Public perception. The kind of manipulation that doesn't care for the old rules of omertà or honor. Still, Salvatore adapts. He sends a message, not digitally, by paper, passed hand to hand across 5 towns. It reaches a man in a government office in Caltanissetta, a middle manager, harmless. The note says, I know the water is cleaner than it should be. That's all. The man reads it 3 times. Because he doesn't know. But the implication is enough. That someone thinks he's covering something. That someone is watching. That someone will make noise if provoked. He pulls back. Files are closed. Access revoked. That's how Salvatore wins. Not by proving guilt, but by suggesting that proving innocence would be more expensive. But not everything is clean. There's a man named Spataro, low-level fixer, recently arrived, working as a contractor liaison. No one knows who sent him, but he's always in the right place at the wrong time. Always asking questions without really asking. Donato trails him. watches him exchange envelopes with a courier who doesn't look like a courier, watches him linger near the port's new intake valves. Then, one day, Spataro vanishes. No funeral, no police report. His apartment is found spotless, clothes still in the drawers, phone on the charger, just gone, and Barcelona breathes. Many people still think Salvatore's strength is his reach, but that's not true. It's his restraint. He knows what power costs. He knows when not to strike. That's what keeps him standing while others burn themselves out chasing more. So when Rome circles again, as it always does, they find nothing worth lighting. Just an old town with perfect ledgers, faithful citizens, a refurbished cathedral, and a shadow that doesn't cast behind, but in all directions at once. The ancient hilltop ruins at Tindari watch over Barcelona like a guardian fallen asleep at its post. Silent, crumbling, sacred. On days when the sea fog rolls in thick and low, the sanctuary disappears altogether, veiled by mist, leaving only the echo of gulls and the scent of rosemary to suggest it's still there. Salvatore walks there sometimes, not often. Just when the noise becomes too much and the chessboard feels too crowded. The ruins remind him of how little remains of those who once ruled with certainty. Columns worn smooth, steps that go nowhere, statues with no faces. He sits on the edge of an old stone bench, chewing a piece of licorice and watching the sun try to claw its way through the haze. This morning he's not alone. An old priest approaches, Don Pietro, who knows too much and speaks too little. They've shared wine over cracked glasses and stories over broken bread, but they're not friends in the ordinary sense. They simply understand each other. Don Pietro sits beside him without a word, hands him a folded slip of paper. No envelope, just dry parchment. It contains one name, not unfamiliar but not expected. Tommaso La Rocca, a mid-level fixer from the East Coast, known for logistics, rarely for boldness. But recently, La Rocca has been visiting Messina under false names, renting storefronts, leasing storage spaces, speaking with people who shouldn't be speaking at all. And now, Don Pietro's note confirms what Salvatore suspected. La Rocca has begun asking about vacancies. That's not innocent. In Barcelona, there are no vacancies. Not in leadership, not in roots, not in silence. Salvatore tucks the note away. Have you spoken to him? He asks. No, Don Pietro replies, but I heard him described. How? As someone who walks like he owns something he hasn't bought yet. Salvatore nods once. That's a dangerous way to walk. By the time he returns to town, the day has turned golden and sticky. Children chase pigeons through the piazza. Women hang bed sheets from balconies. The smell of frying sardines curls through the air. Salvatore doesn't go home. He walks straight to a tailor named Romano, old, bent, and nearly blind. Romano doesn't sew anymore, not really. But he hears things, and he's owed Salvatore since the day his son walked free from a charge that should have stuck. Romano opens the back room. Inside, not cloth, but files, receipts, sign-in sheets, photocopies of IDs that were never meant to be kept. La Rocca's signature is there, twice, under two names, same handwriting. Salvatore runs his finger along the ink, then taps once. This one. Who brought him? Romano coughs. Girl, early 20s, thin, leather bag, local. He doesn't ask why it matters. He never does. Salvatore thanks him and leaves. Outside, the sky is beginning to bruise at the edges. A thunderstorm in the mountains pushes a cool wind down through the alleyways, and he feels it again, the tightening. La Rocca isn't coming for him with guns. He's coming with substitutions, quietly laying groundwork for a structure that doesn't yet exist, but could. It's offensive, not because Salvatore fears being replaced, but because La Rocca is trying to skip the rhythm, to plant without first blessing the soil. And that, in Barcelona, is the worst offense of all. He doesn't send a message. He sends a man named Ronaldo. Ronaldo doesn't threaten. He compliments. He buys drinks. He tells funny stories about growing up near Mount Etna. And then, in the middle of a laugh, he says, "You know, La Rocca, some towns, they just don't like new shoes walking on old floors." La Rocca pretends to misunderstand. Rinaldo leaves him with a gift, a small ceramic dish with the image of Tindari etched into it and a note on the back. The Stones remember. La Rocca gets the point. He cancels the storefront lease, pulls out of the warehouse deal, stops attending meetings, and then, 1 week later, something unexpected happens. La Rocca sends his own message. A parcel, small, wrapped in butcher's paper, hand-delivered by a boy with no idea what he's carrying. Inside, a photograph of La Rocca standing beside his father, dead 20 years now, on the steps of a church in Giardini Naxos, and written on the back, "We only wanted a corner." Salvatore stares at the photo for a long time, then he tears it in half, not out of spite, but because some corners can't be shared. And La Rocca already knew that. Still, the incident leaves a tremor in the town. Not fear, but restlessness. If La Rocca tried, someone else will too. So Salvatore begins making his own rounds again. Not through intermediaries, not with quiet glances, but in person. He visits the butcher, the librarian, the man who repairs watches but hasn't sold one in years. And to each of them, he says the same thing, in slightly different ways. If someone asks you where I've been, tell them, watching the weather. Because storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they creep in with the morning fog, just like they did on the day Salvatore found himself sitting in a courtroom in Palermo 20 years ago, beside a cousin who couldn't keep his mouth shut. That cousin now runs a vineyard in silence, voluntarily. Salvatore doesn't raise his voice, but he does raise stakes, quietly, smartly. He buys a new warehouse, this one real, this one registered. He hires 2 cousins from Basilicata to oversee it. Clean, young, no local history. And then he lets the paperwork leak, letting others believe something is shifting. But it's a bluff, or maybe a net, because now, anyone who tries to make a move will reveal themselves. Thinking Salvatore is building something new, thinking there's an opportunity to undercut or intercept, but really, he's just listening harder, waiting longer, and drawing the lines of Barcelona's quiet borders once more, not with fences, but with memory. Many people still think the sanctuary at Tindari was built as a monument to protection, but really, it was built as a warning, a place where even stone remembers the shape of those who disrespected the silence. And Salvatore? He's the echo of that shape, still standing. The rains begin early that autumn. Not the hard, urgent storms that slam roofs and flood alleyways, but the soft kind, the slow drizzle that clings to shutters and trickles down rusted gutters like time made visible. Barcelona welcomes it. Dust settles. The streets breathe, and Salvatore Mancuso walks, not far, not fast, just enough to be seen by those who need to see him, and invisible to those who don't. His coat damp at the shoulders, his hands warm in his pockets, his breath rising in faint ribbons. He heads uphill, not toward the ruins, not today. Today, he's going to visit someone who's fallen quiet. His name is Nunzio Galati, a mid-level accountant, nominally retired, who used to run numbers for a shipping company that only existed on paper. Galati is careful, the kind of man who ties his shoes before putting on his pants. But lately, Galati has stopped appearing in places where he's usually punctual. No morning espresso, no bakery visits, not even Sunday Mass. That alone wouldn't concern Salvatore, except for the fact that Galati's wife recently took a job, at her age, in a town like this. That means something's wrong. Salvatore reaches the house, knocks twice, no answer. Then a third knock. Galati opens the door in a bathrobe, his hair uncombed, his eyes slightly red. He blinks, registers the visitor, and doesn't speak. "Can I come in?" Salvatore asks. Galati nods once and steps aside. Inside, the house smells of boiled cabbage and unresolved tension. The television plays softly in another room, tuned to a game show with no contestants. They sit at a table. Galati puts on water. Doesn't ask what's needed. Doesn't offer excuses. Finally, Salvatore says, "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Galati doesn't flinch. He nods slowly. "She came to the house," he says. Salvatore raises an eyebrow. "Who?" "A woman from Caltanissetta. Said she worked for an NGO. Asked about pension irregularities, but she wasn't asking about me. She was asking about you." That changes the air in the room. "She offered money?" Salvatore asks. Galati nods. "More than I've ever seen." "And?" "I took it, but I didn't give her anything real." Salvatore studies him. There's no lie in Galati's voice, just shame. "What did you give her?" "A receipt. From '98. Something about a container marked as agricultural supplies. It wasn't yours. It was before your time." "But she thought it mattered." "She didn't care. She just wanted something with your name in the margins." Salvatore exhales. "And the money?" "Gone, my son, gambling." He doesn't apologize. Salvatore appreciates that. Regret is noise. Action is signal. He stands. "You're going to leave town for a while." Galati swallows. "Where?" "Trapani. My cousin has a vineyard. You'll help with the ledgers, it's quiet." Galati nods again. "And my wife?" "She's already packed." That gets a blink, a twitch of the mouth, but still no protest. Salvatore walks to the door. Before leaving, he turns back. "They'll come again. Not for you, for others. Be sure they know the price of listening." Galati nods and Salvatore disappears into the rain. That night, he sits under the cracked archway of his childhood courtyard, watching the rain pool in the basin where lemons used to grow. His mother once used that water to wash clothes. Now it's just a memory with plumbing. Donato joins him, silent as always. "They're getting bold," Salvatore says. Donato nods. "They're getting sloppy," Salvatore adds. Another nod. He reaches into his coat, produces a file folder wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, photos, handwritten notes, surveillance of a regional journalist named Terenzio. A man with slick hair, good shoes, and a knack for saying the quiet parts loud. "He's the leak," Salvatore says. Donato flips through the folder, frowns at a photo of Terenzio shaking hands with a known contact from Naples. "We could frighten him," Donato offers. Salvatore shakes his head. "He'd write about it, use it." Silence. Then he says, "Let's make him feel invited instead." The next morning, Terenzio receives a letter. Elegant stationery. No return address. Just a sentence. "There are stories that haven't happened yet. Wouldn't you like to be the first to know them?" Inside is a business card for a fictitious development firm and an address, an empty office on the edge of town. Terenzio bites. He arrives the next week. Waits. Is welcomed by a polite woman in a blazer. Offered espresso. Given a folder containing blueprints, financial projections, and a list of concerns involving various rival investors. None of it's real, but all of it sounds real enough to write about. Terenzio publishes a piece. Half speculation, half fact. Names are changed. Dates fuzzed. But the bones are there, and they're wrong, which is exactly the point. By planting a false narrative, Salvatore smokes out those watching. Whoever moves in response to Terenzio's article will reveal their hand, and someone does. A courier from Messina shows up at the empty office the next week, demanding to speak with the development director. The receptionist smiles, apologizes, asks him to leave a number. That number leads straight to a burner line in Reggio Calabria, and Salvatore smiles, because now he knows who's listening. In Barcelona, the rain finally stops. The sky clears with the kind of softness that makes children run barefoot in the street again, and Salvatore walks the market. He buys figs, tips a fishmonger, comments on the price of lentils. Ordinary things, but each word, each nod, each slow step is a signal that everything is still in rhythm, that the silence still holds. Many people still think that Salvatore Mancuso survives because he's invisible, but the truth is simpler. He survives because he's obvious, but only to the people who know what not to say. The accountant's office overlooks nothing special, just a quiet bend in the road where pigeons argue over breadcrumbs and delivery trucks stall more often than they should. But it's from this unremarkable second floor that a mistake unfolds. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough. Salvatore notices it because he always notices. It begins with a missing column, a digit misaligned in a quarterly ledger from the courier service he technically doesn't own. A rounding error at first glance, a typo. Harmless, except Salvatore doesn't believe in harmless mistakes. He's read the ledger 3 times before the espresso cools on his desk. There's a name added to the payroll, Giancarlo Ventresca, a name that doesn't belong, doesn't appear in any conversations, doesn't match any family trees, doesn't exist in the cafe whispers, but he's being paid, monthly, modestly, quietly. Salvatore folds the page, taps it once, then picks up the phone. Donato. Ventresca works at a warehouse the size of a chapel and twice as quiet. On paper, he's a floor manager. In reality, he mostly smokes and avoids the forklift. His co-workers don't know much about him. He came recommended, kept to himself, arrived with references, none of them local. That's the first flag. The second is that he eats lunch at odd times, away from others, always watching. Donato spends 3 days trailing him. No meetings, no calls, just a man too comfortable being invisible. That's the third flag. On the 4th day, Ventresca vanishes. Doesn't clock out. Doesn't return home. His apartment, a rental above a shuttered bakery, is empty. Clothes in drawers, groceries untouched, but the toothbrush is missing, and the sheets are gone, which means he knew. Someone warned him. That's the real issue, not the fraud, not the infiltration. The leak. Salvatore doesn't shout, doesn't tighten his circle. He expands it. He invites 5 people to dinner, not lieutenants, not soldiers, just men and women who hear things. A notary, a florist, a barber's widow, a retired midwife, and the man who sweeps the city hall steps before sunrise. They eat slowly, no questions, until Salvatore, somewhere between wine and biscotti, asks, "What happens to a ghost when he forgets to haunt?" No one answers, because the question isn't meant to be answered. It's meant to be remembered. The next day, Salvatore receives a letter. No stamp, no signature, just a scrap of notebook paper, folded twice. It says, he was seen meeting someone near the basilica, a man with a scar under his left eye. That's enough. The basilica is neutral ground. No one holds meetings there. Not unless they want to send a message. Salvatore goes that night, not in anger, in calculation. He doesn't expect to find the man, but he wants to feel the space, the residual tension, the trace of footsteps on the marble. And it's there, in the pews, 3rd row, a pack of cigarettes, foreign brand, fresh, left like an apology. He pockets them. Back at his office, Salvatore begins drawing connections. Not on a computer, on paper. Lines, arrows, names, cities, port logs. The picture that forms isn't clear, but it whispers. Ventresca wasn't alone. He was part of a test, a pressure applied to a specific seam in the system. Not enough to rip, but enough to see where the fabric stretches. And that means someone is planning something larger. He makes a decision. He needs to slow the rhythm, not stop it, not disrupt it, but thicken it, so that anyone trying to match it from outside finds it too heavy to mimic. He starts by complicating the logistics. Routes are changed. Not drastically, just slightly enough to confuse any mapped patterns. The driver's schedule rotates, storage locations shuffle, communication reverts to analog, paper notes, handwritten ledgers, ink that smudges on damp fingers. Then he muddies the personnel records, creates aliases for people who already exist, assigns phantom supervisors, re-registers the same warehouse under 3 different shell companies. All legal, all clean. It's a maze designed to frustrate surveillance. And it works, because 2 weeks later, a police inquiry begins in Palermo, not in Barcelona. Someone filed a complaint about inconsistencies in logistics permits. Too far from the source, too clumsy. They're not following Salvatore. They're following his footprints, old ones. Still, he can't shake the feeling that Ventresca was just the beginning. A scout, a measure. So he goes to the one person in town who's been paid to notice what others ignore. A garbage collector. Giorgio, 65, slight limp, works the pre-dawn route. Salvatore meets him at 4:30 a.m., offers a warm roll and a cigarette. They sit on the back of the truck, watching the sky bleed from black to gray. Anyone new? Salvatore asks. Giorgio shrugs. There's a man. Always walks his dog when I pass Via Benedetto. Rain or shine. Doesn't speak. Same coat. But he never picks up after the dog. That's not a crime, but it is a pattern. Later that week, Donato tails the man. He doesn't lead to anything concrete. Just a studio apartment rented in cash. No phone, no neighbors. But when Donato finally breaks in, there's a map on the wall of Barcelona with marks. One of them? Salvatore's office. Another? The lemon tree in his mother's courtyard. That's enough. Salvatore removes the man. No headlines, no noise. He simply ceases to be, and Barcelona breathes again. But not for long, because shortly after, a boy shows up at the church with a drawing. A child's drawing of a man with a scar, and a dog, and a suitcase. The boy says he found it in the trash. But Salvatore knows better. It was placed. A message. Someone is watching again, and they're clever enough to use children as couriers. That's when he begins preparing for absence, not escape. Contingency. He writes letters, stores documents in places only one other person knows, assigns authority to people who don't even realize they've been chosen yet. Because if the ghost must vanish, the rhythm must continue. He won't let Barcelona collapse, not from pressure, not from inside, not from silence broken by ambition. Many people still think the man with no guns is the easiest to remove. But in Barcelona, the man without weapons is the one who trained the wind not to whistle too loudly. And when that man disappears, even the pigeons hesitate before landing. The rain fades. In its place, the sun returns, reluctantly at first, poking through cloud cover like a gambler counting chips after a long night. Barcelona smells of damp stone and wet leaves. Streets gleam, sidewalks glisten, and the town stretches its limbs beneath the soft October light. But Salvatore does not relax, because rain reveals things. Cracks in plaster, leaks in roofs, and more importantly, patterns in footsteps. Donato hands him a photo one morning. Black and white, grainy, taken from a second-story flat. It shows a car parked outside the home of Giorgio, the garbage man. The same man who helped them identify the dog walker. The car is unfamiliar. The photo was taken by a widow who hasn't left her apartment in 12 years. Her cat had been watching the street, so she watched too. Salvatore studies the picture. Not the car, the angle. It was parked perfectly to see both Giorgio's home and the street to Salvatore's mother's courtyard. He says, they're not circling anymore, they're waiting. Donato doesn't ask for clarification. He simply nods and steps into motion. That night, Salvatore meets with a priest, not Don Pietro this time, but a younger man, Father Marco. Recently transferred from Catania. Clean face, clean collar, soft hands. He listens well. Salvatore doesn't confess, but he offers a story. There's a man in town who thinks he understands everything. He's memorized the timetables, the phone numbers, The registry entries. He believes that if he catches me, the whole system will fall like dominoes. Father Marco nods. Salvatore continues. But this man doesn't realize something simple. I didn't build dominoes. I built anchors. They don't fall. They sink. And when they do, they drag everything else into silence. The priest, to his credit, doesn't flinch. I need a name, Salvatore says, and he gets it. The man is named Vincenzo Sara, 39, works in utilities inspection, supposedly harmless, except he's not. Sara has been rerouting work orders, visiting buildings on streets that never reported issues, asking questions under the guise of maintenance, and, most notably, carrying a small device that records radio frequencies. He's a collector. Information, voices, habits. Salvatore doesn't confront him. He doesn't even tell Donato. Instead, he asks the tailor, Romano, to lose Sara's measurements. Within a week, Sara receives 3 minor inconveniences: a blocked water line, a city tax discrepancy, and a revoked parking permit. None are traced. All are disruptive. By the second week, Sara's file with the utilities office is quietly reclassified as freelance. His benefits are paused. His route is reassigned to the outskirts of Milazzo. He gets the hint. Barcelona closes its doors to him, one by one. But even as Sara fades from view, Salvatore remains tense. Because this isn't random. These scouts, these collectors, they all point to a pattern. Someone's mapping the town through its edges. So Salvatore moves inward. He calls on Maria Calabro, the librarian, 84 years old, sharp as a blade, controls the town's archives not with locks, but with guilt. She welcomes him with tea that tastes like history. You think someone's building a new book? She asks. No, Salvatore replies. I think they're trying to erase one. Maria pulls out a file, old, yellowed, smells like old matches. Inside are records from 1979, land deeds, shipment receipts, a wedding license, a funeral notice, all related to the same address, an apartment near the port that burned down in 1983. It's where your uncle kept his papers, Maria whispers. Salvatore nods. What he's learning isn't new, it's forgotten. And someone else is digging in the same soil. The next morning, the envelope arrives. No return address, no stamp. Inside, a single Polaroid. It shows Donato standing at the market, smiling, talking to a vendor. The message is clear. We're watching you back. Salvatore doesn't panic, but he does change the rhythm. He stops walking to the market, sends others. He moves his meetings to new locations, starts using different cafes, rotates the people who deliver messages, changes the courier routes. To the outsider, it looks paranoid. To those inside, it's a storm sheltering in motion. And then, without warning, the wind stops. No more Polaroids. No more unmarked cars. No more missing receipts, which is worse, because Salvatore knows silence like a heartbeat. And this is not natural. He calls Enzo the barber. Any new faces? He asks. Enzo pauses, then says, no, but a lot of familiar ones have gone quiet. That's enough. Salvatore moves to contain. He halts 2 shipments, cancels 3 contracts, pulls 5 men off routine jobs and sends them home. Then he writes a letter. Not a threat, not a warning, a reminder. It's addressed only as Al Confine. To the border. Inside it says, you came looking for echoes, but some of us are still speaking. He hands it to a delivery driver heading to Calabria. No name, no explanation. Just the kind of message that rattles the trees when birds start disappearing. Many people still think that Salvatore's empire is made of people, but in truth it's made of decisions. Thousands of them, tiny, unseen, stacked like bones beneath cobblestones. And when he shifts even one, the entire town feels it. That's why, when Donato returns home late that night, his door already unlocked, he doesn't panic. He sits, waits, and then laughs softly, because on his table is a bottle of wine, opened, 2 glasses, a note beneath one. You missed a step. Don't do it again. Salvatore was there, watching his own watcher. resetting the balance, one shadow at a time. It begins with a missing man, Giorgio Scalia, driver, 38, quiet, no debts, no enemies, no past that required cleaning. He simply doesn't show up one morning. At first, no one worries. Drivers get sick, cars break down, people misread schedules. But by noon, his phone goes unanswered. By nightfall, his apartment is found undisturbed, keys still on the hook, wallet untouched, shoes neatly by the door, and yet no Giorgio. Salvatore finds out before the second espresso is poured at the cafe. He doesn't panic. He doesn't call anyone. He simply goes for a walk. Barcelona is a town where the truth is usually just one question away. If asked in the right tone and to the right person, with the right silence wrapped around it. Salvatore knows the tone, knows the people, and has perfected the silence. By early afternoon, he knows this. Giorgio had coffee with someone unfamiliar the day before. Not a stranger exactly. Just someone who shouldn't have been at that cafe at that time, asking that many questions about shipping routes, of all things. And Giorgio, gentle, decent, loyal Giorgio, had talked. Not much, but enough, because that's all it takes. Salvatore walks to the port. No entourage. Just his old coat and a small white envelope in his inside pocket. He hands the envelope to a clerk with oily hands and tired eyes. Find out where the fishing boats moored yesterday between 5 and 8, he says. And which ones left but didn't come back. The clerk nods, doesn't ask why. 2 hours later, the list is on Salvatore's desk. One boat stands out, Luz Bianca, a boat with papers filed but no recent catch. Registered in Milazzo. Its owner died 6 months ago, which means someone is using it as cover. He doesn't go looking for Giorgio that night. He doesn't send men. Instead, he waits, because if someone took him, they'll want to send a message. And Salvatore prefers to let people believe they're the ones in control, until they realize the leash has always been around their neck. At dawn, the message arrives. A parcel. No markings. Left on the step of a bakery that hasn't sold bread in 3 years. Inside, Giorgio's watch. Not broken, not bloody, just ticking. Alongside it, a photo. Giorgio, blindfolded, sitting on a chair in what looks like the hull of a boat. He's not hurt, not bound, but his posture says he's scared. And written on the back, "Tell your king to bend, or we'll cut the pawns." Salvatore reads it once, then burns it. Because here's the thing. He's not the king. Never has been. He's the board itself. The rules. The silence between moves. The rhythm of the game. So he doesn't bend. He closes ranks. First, he halts all routes north. No trucks leave Barcelona for 48 hours. He doesn't explain. The drivers grumble. The clients complain. But the silence holds. Then he calls Vico. Vico is not a man of warmth. He runs a scrapyard, sleeps under a fan in a metal office. But 20 years ago, Salvatore once sat beside him in a hospital waiting room while Vico's wife gave birth and didn't make it. Vico has owed him since. Salvatore hands Vico a name, Luz Bianca. "I don't want the boat sunk," he says, "just made inconvenient." That night, the boat's engine fails 3 times, and when a crew comes to repair it, they find the propeller jammed with wire and a sea urchin jammed in the intake. Not sabotage, not exactly. Just the kind of misfortune that makes a boat suddenly very visible to port authorities. The boat doesn't sail again, but Giorgio isn't found. Not yet, so Salvatore makes his next move. He invites a journalist, not Terenzio, a different one, from Palermo. Ambitious, naive, and hungry for scandal. He feeds her a story, half true, half bait, about shipping fraud, about municipal corruption, about a boat named Luz Bianca and a man named Giorgio Scalia, who may or may not be missing. She bites. The article runs in 2 regional papers, and suddenly, everyone is watching. Port authorities, Coast Guard, local police, and whoever took Giorgio. Now they can't move without being seen. Giorgio is released 3 days later, found walking alone on the beach near Paddy. Soaked, hungry, unharmed. He says nothing, but Salvatore knows he was let go, not out of mercy, but out of calculation, because someone realized they'd underestimated him. That's when the real message comes, not in words, but in inaction. No more new faces, no more shadow cars, no more scout behavior. Whoever was probing Barcelona just backed off, but that's not victory, because in stepping away they've told Salvatore something he didn't know until now. They weren't testing him. They were testing the system, trying to find weak points, to map his rhythm, to measure his reactions, and now they've seen it. That's more dangerous than an enemy. That's investment. He meets with Donato. They'll return, Salvatore says. Not soon, but they will. With suits instead of boots, with pens instead of ropes. Maybe they'll even offer partnership. Donato nods. And when they do, Salvatore finishes his wine. We let them think they've bought the town. Pause. And then we send them the receipt for something they never owned. Barcelona remains calm, but the calm is different now. Measured, tuned, and Salvatore? He watches it all from the lemon courtyard, listening to Giorgio's quiet footsteps each morning as he resumes his delivery rounds. Alive, because sometimes the message you send isn't violence. It's returning someone whole, just a little quieter. Many people still think that Salvatore survives because he outsmarts his enemies, but in truth, he survives because he teaches them what loss feels like before they lose anything. There's an alley behind the magistrate's office in Barcelona that smells of copper and rain. It's where the delivery vans double park, where stray cats fight for scraps, and where, according to an old mechanic who smokes filterless cigarettes, a few of the town's old debts still echo. Salvatore visits it at dusk, not for any practical reason. He's walked this alley for 30 years, sometimes with purpose, sometimes without. Tonight, he's listening, not with his ears, with his rhythm. Something is off. The magistrate's lights are still on, even though she left 2 hours ago. There's a man on the roof of the pharmacy, fiddling with an antenna. A pigeon lands twice on the same window ledge, then leaves. It's subtle, but it's there. They're watching again. He doesn't rush. Instead, he buys a gelato from the corner shop, lemon and pistachio, his mother's favorite combination, and sits on the stone bench outside the municipal building. From here, he can see everything, especially the things that don't want to be seen. And tonight he sees them. Not faces, patterns, a white car that circles twice, a camera too still in a third-floor window, a man pretending to fix a parking meter that hasn't worked in months. It's not the usual surveillance, it's smarter, familiar, which means one thing. They've learned from their last failure. Salvatore finishes the gelato, wipes his hands, walks home. By the time he arrives, the plan is forming. Step 1. Reintroduce noise. Barcelona, under Salvatore, has become too smooth, too perfect. A system that functions so quietly, even its flaws sound rehearsed. That's not safe anymore. So he creates friction, a labor strike, quietly seated at the courier depot. A permit dispute between 2 shell companies he owns. A land surveyor who shows up unexpectedly, demanding new records. All staged, all messy. To the outside eye, it looks like decay. To those inside, it's choreography. Because the more chaotic things appear, the less likely they are to be restructured from the outside. Step 2. Reactivate the quiet officers. These aren't gangsters. These are servants of rhythm. A retired school administrator who still reviews applications. A priest who reads between confessions. A librarian who logs overdue books not by date, but by name frequency. They begin to report anomalies. A man visiting City Hall 3 days in a row with the same empty briefcase. A camera placed in a gas meter on a street with no gas lines. A woman pretending to be a census worker, asking about basements. Salvatore maps the activity, cross-references the intersections. It's not surveillance anymore. It's infiltration. They're building trust, slowly, patiently, trying to replace the old rhythm with a new one. He won't allow it. There's an office above a watch repair shop near the train station. It's officially vacant. Unofficially, it's where 2 officers from Rome are working without permission, disguised as municipal consultants. Salvatore learns this not through bribery, but through the reflection in a mirror. A boy selling newspapers glances into the window one morning and sees 3 cups of coffee, 2 laptops, and 1 map of the train routes marked in red. He tells his father. His father tells the woman who sells him tomatoes. She tells Enzo, and Enzo tells Salvatore. That's how a network survives. Not through technology, but through consistency. Salvatore doesn't confront the officers. He sends a basket of oranges. Inside, a note. Wrong train. The next day, the office is empty, but the attempt leaves residue, which is why Salvatore calls a meeting, not with people, with places. He visits the chapel, the butcher, the bank vault that still requires a key, not a code. And to each place, he pays a quiet respect, a nod, a breath, a wordless pause, because in Barcelona, places carry memory, and tonight, they need to remember who owns them. The storm breaks that weekend, not with thunder, but with an article published anonymously, pitched as satire. Headlined, "The quietest town in Italy has the loudest secrets." It names no one, but it references everything. Trade routes, tax shelters, local patterns. Salvatore reads it once, then again, then a third time, slowly. It's dangerous, because it's not wrong, which means someone inside is feeding it. A betrayal, not an outsider, a citizen. He circles names, possible sources, then writes 1 word beside each. Grateful? It narrows the list. By morning, he knows, a man named Cesare Puglisi, mid-level clerk, handles municipal contracts. Once had his mother's home saved from foreclosure, thanks to a signature Salvatore placed without acknowledgement. Apparently, Cesare has forgotten. That afternoon, Cesare finds his office reassigned. A lower floor, no windows, no phone, just a chair and a letter. "You spoke, now you'll listen." Cesare resigns the next week. No pension. Barcelona adjusts again. Many people still think that Salvatore's reach is the key to his survival, but it's not. It's his response time. He doesn't wait to be attacked. He feels the pressure change in the air and moves before the wind ever shifts. That's why when the article gets picked up by a national columnist and then quietly dropped without explanation, Salvatore doesn't celebrate. He pours a small glass of Amaro, sits by the lemon tree, and watches the shadow he casts stretch long across the stones, because he knows the truth. They're not trying to kill him. They're trying to replace him, and that is a slower war. But he's ready. He's always been ready. There's an olive grove just beyond the northern ridge of Barcelona, where the trees lean slightly to the east, as if listening to the sea. It's not marked on any official map, and no sign welcomes you. But the locals know it. They call it La Soglia, the threshold, between what was once soaked in blood and what now bears fruit. Salvatore visits it before dawn. He doesn't drive. He walks the winding road from his villa, hands behind his back, shoulders draped in a wool shawl he's worn since the late 80s. There's dew in the air and salt on the breeze. The cicadas have not yet woken. The silence is honest here, and that's rare. The grove is his cathedral, not for confession. He keeps those locked deep, but for reflection. Because this is where it happened. The incident they never name. The evening when 3 men came to kill him, and only 2 left. He buried the 3rd beneath the oldest tree. No marker, no flowers, just roots. He never returned to that specific spot. He lets the tree do the remembering. That morning, Salvatore is not here for memories. He's here for calibration. Barcelona is shifting again. It's subtle, like the twitch of an old watch before it stops ticking. The markets remain full. The buses still hum. But the flow, that quiet pulse that tells him everything, is no longer smooth. It skips, and when rhythm skips, something's entering that shouldn't. He kneels by a young sapling and presses his palm into the soil. It's not symbolic. It's habit. The earth tells stories the newspapers don't. He stays until his knees ache, then stands, brushing dust from his pants with surgical care. On his way back, he passes a man painting shutters on a farmhouse. The man nods, respectful, but Salvatore notes the bristles on his brush. Too fine for wood, more suited to canvas. He walks slower. The dog near the fence doesn't bark. Odd. He files it away. By noon, his office smells of oranges and engine oil. That's Enzo's doing. He's changed his cologne again. Salvatore doesn't comment. Instead, he draws a circle on a sheet of unlined paper. Inside the circle, 4 dots. Around it, a square. He turns it to Enzo. What does it look like? Enzo hesitates. A trap? Salvatore nods. Or a dance floor. He's not being cryptic. He's drawing a layout for a meeting that hasn't happened yet. A meeting that shouldn't happen. A meeting that must happen. If the rhythm is to survive. Because the problem isn't just infiltration anymore. It's migration. Small crews from Reggio are making inquiries. Nothing direct. Just whispers at mechanic shops. Unsolicited drinks at cafes. Idle chats at the football pitch. They're probing. And Salvatore doesn't like being probed, so he sends invitations. Not in envelopes, in habits. One man finds his usual coffee spot closed and a new barista at the replacement shop. Another receives a delivery of shoes he never ordered. Perfect size. A third finds his daughter's school schedule adjusted just enough to grant him a free afternoon. All paths lead to a villa just outside Barcelona. One rarely used, no cameras, and guarded only by shadows. They come, cautiously. He greets them with wine and silence. They speak first. That's the game. They talk about opportunity, shared logistics, shared muscle, perhaps a temporary integration. They use words like efficiency and future-proofing. He listens, then laughs once. Gentlemen, he says, Barcelona doesn't need plumbing. It flows. It's not a rejection. It's a warning. But one of the younger men, Mario, with his slick haircut and anxious hands, doesn't understand the tone. He insists, talks about growth, about the benefits of scale, about how the old ways are slow, romantic, fragile. Salvatore lets him finish, then gestures toward the olive oil bottle on the table. Do you know how we extract it? He asks, calm. Mario shrugs. We press the fruit gently, Salvatore says. If you're in a hurry, it tastes bitter. If you're forceful, it spoils. Silence. Then he adds, you're welcome to taste what we produce, but not to own the press. The message is received. They leave with smiles, and by nightfall, one of them calls from a safe house in Taormina, already distancing himself from Mario. The system works. Again. That evening, Salvatore returns to the Grove, this time with a folding chair and a bottle of Amaro. He doesn't sit. He just stands. The moon is pale, almost shy. A single bird warbles sleepily in the branches. The world for a moment feels suspended. He remembers the face of the man he buried. He never learned his name, never asked, but sometimes in the silence he whispers, Grazie, not out of guilt, out of clarity, because that moment cemented everything. It showed him what Barcelona needed, not dominance, not expansion, just definition. And now, decades later, as rivals circle and investigators tighten their webs, Salvatore still lives by the lesson that body taught him. Act only when you've already won. By midnight, he walks home with the same rhythm he always has. 4 beats per turn. Pause at the shadowed corner. Slight glance at the shutters above Enzo's old flat. Everything feels aligned, except one thing. As he turns the final corner, he sees a newspaper tucked into his mailbox. He never subscribes. He never gets deliveries. He unfolds it. On the back, a handwritten note. Some shadows stretched too long. He folds it back. No panic, no alarm. Just a new ripple. The game has entered another phase, but that's all right. He has olives, silence, and a town that still speaks in his rhythm. For now, the man who reigns unseen must also speak without speaking. That's the rule Salvatore Mancuso has always followed. And in Barcelona, Pozzo di Godo, it's the only rule that matters. A whisper carries farther than a gunshot. A glance, if timed just right, can stop an entire shipment dead in its tracks. But even whispers need grammar. Even glances need structure. So he builds a code. Not written, not taught, not even spoken aloud. It's felt. The code of the invisible, as prosecutors would later call it, doesn't exist in any official ledger. Yet it governs the city more strictly than any parliamentary law. It works through consistency, rituals of silence, customs of payment, a specific number of clinks when a glass is set down. And above all, it works because no one wants to test what happens when it's broken. The rules are simple. You never follow the same path to the same place 2 days in a row. You never greet someone with a handshake unless they offer first. You never ask about someone else's family unless you're prepared to protect them. And you never, ever talk about Salvatore in public using his full name. Not unless you want to become a lesson. Even Salvatore himself follows the code. He walks the back streets to his tailor, a 92-year-old who still uses wooden spools and always cuts 1 centimeter short at the cuff, a silent sign of allegiance. He tips the delivery boy with coins minted before 1980, each wrapped in red thread. He uses a pocket calendar from a closed-down pharmacy in Messina and writes only in green ink. It's not superstition, it's signature. Each habit, each detail, an echo that signals, I am still here. His associates follow suit, not by command, but by intuition. A system of behavioral osmosis. They know when to pause, when to blink, when to let a phone ring 3 times and never answer. Even the market vendors play along. The fishmonger always leaves the last eel unsold if it writhes to the left. The butcher reserves a particular cut of lamb for a customer who never arrives. The florist clips the stems an extra inch short on Tuesdays, because someone long ago decided that Tuesdays belonged to the memory of old blood. None of it is necessary, but it is sacred, and sacred is what keeps the walls standing. Still, outside forces don't speak the language. The newer crews from Palermo, hot with ambition and loud with success, enter Barcelona like tourists. They wear designer shirts with shiny cuffs, drive cars that shout too loud for these narrow streets. They try to shake hands. They talk fast. Salvatore watches. He doesn't stop them. Not at first. Watching them break the code is more instructive than punishing them. Every violation sends a ripple. Every ripple tests the waters. He waits until the 3rd ripple. That's tradition. So when a visiting captain from Brancaccio loudly asks about the ghost who runs this place, Salvatore does not flinch. He simply arranges a conversation. No threats, no overt confrontation, just a dinner, a quiet table under strings of lazy yellow lights, mismatched chairs, 3 plates. The captain is seated first. The other man, a local, soft-spoken, older, joins later. Salvatore never appears. Instead, a bottle of wine arrives with no label. The old man pours. They drink. No one talks. After 20 minutes, the captain tries to laugh. I thought I'd get to meet the Phantom himself. The old man just chews, then places a spoon beside his glass, upside down, and leaves. The captain laughs again, nervous now. He gets up to follow, but he's gently stopped by the waiter. You've been seen, the waiter says. Seen? That's all. The captain leaves Barcelona the next day, without luggage. Back in his study, Salvatore sketches in his notebook. Not words, shapes, patterns, triangles inside circles, overlapping lines that resemble the movement of tides or the flight path of startled birds. Each drawing represents a pulse, an event, a gesture, a message. He doesn't see people anymore. He sees rhythms. That's how the code stays alive. The world outside thrives on data and surveillance. Cameras, microphones, pings from phones that betray their owners faster than any informant. But Salvatore's code exists beneath the layer of detection. It's analog, oral, instinctual, and it works most of the time. One winter afternoon, he notices a break. It's small, a cup of espresso served with a lemon rind instead of the usual sugar cube. An honest mistake? Perhaps. But then, a child throws stones near the wrong wall, one marked by a centuries-old symbol only 3 men still remember. And then someone honks twice at the bakery where the rule is 1 long beep, 1 short. These aren't accidents. They're tests. But from whom? He doesn't know yet, so he adjusts the code. A subtle nudge. Vendors place their baskets an inch farther from the curb. The tailor closes an hour early. The florist switches her trimming knife from right to left pocket. Within 48 hours, the disturbance stops. No retaliation, no violence, just recalibration, like tightening a piano string. Many people still think that Barcelona's peace in the 1990s was due to fear, that the silence came from dread. But what if it came from harmony? What if the city hummed not because it was scared, but because it was tuned? That's the debate still whispered in the legal chambers of Messina and in the sociology departments of Rome. Was Salvatore a tyrant? Or a conductor? Because if you remove a conductor from an orchestra, the music doesn't just stop, it collapses. So what do you think? What's more terrifying? A city ruled by fear, or one that chose silence because it worked better than noise? The code endures. Even today, if you go to Barcelona, you'll notice strange habits. Shutters that close not when the sun sets, but when a certain song ends on the radio. A dog that barks only when the bell rings twice, never once. Children who skip a specific hop in their rope game. No one can explain these things. They just are. And that's the point. Because true power isn't remembered in books or shouted in courtrooms. It's echoed, faintly, through rituals no one admits they're repeating. In a world that prized visibility, press releases, title belts, luxury cars, Salvatore Mancuso remained proudest of his invisibility, not just staying off the radar. That was easy. A man could disappear with a wig and a passport. But Salvatore's disappearance was spiritual. His absence had texture, its own weight, like fog filling a valley before sunrise. People didn't see him, they sensed him. And sometimes that was worse. Even his own crew rarely saw him. He never raised his voice, never demanded tribute in public, and never appeared at weddings unless someone very old died. But if you crossed a line, you'd feel it in the tension of the air, like the room itself inhaled. He didn't need to attend. Rooms carried his breath. By 1996, the world outside was shifting. Everywhere, mafias were adapting. The Sicilian clans were splintering from within, the Neapolitans flirting with Colombian trades, and across the water, the Albanian syndicates were pushing hard into drug and arms flows. In that whirlwind, Barcelona stayed silent, not because it had no violence, but because its violence wore gloves, old school, refined, and Salvatore ensured it stayed that way. He once said, "You only hit a man if you're willing to raise his sons afterward." People laughed nervously, unsure whether he meant mentorship or funerals. But beneath the saying was a philosophy. In his world, a strike was never random. It was a correction, a rebalancing, a reminder of which rhythm the dance must follow. Salvatore also understood the rhythm of retreat. He knew when to back away, not out of fear, but patience. So when the Guardia di Finanza started tailing shipments through Gioia Tauro, he didn't panic. He just stopped using Gioia Tauro. Entire operations shifted inland, through smaller mountain routes, goat trails, and forgotten tunnels used during Mussolini's time, and he stopped giving direct orders. Instead, he communicated through food, not code phrases, literal food. A certain brand of orange jam meant delay. Swordfish cutlets on a Wednesday meant approve. Bread delivered warm after 3 p.m.? Cancel everything. His couriers were bakers, his messengers fishermen. The police kept listening for names. Salvatore only whispered in recipes. Do you remember the old man at the tailor's? The one who trimmed cuffs exactly 1 centimeter short? In 1997, that tailor suddenly vanished. His shop shuttered, the awning removed overnight, and yet, no one filed a missing persons report. Not his family, not the neighbors, not even the man who owned the building, because Salvatore sent word through a small sign left on the tailor's window. Me ne sono andato in silenzio, come deve essere. I have left in silence, as it should be. People took it as instruction. The shop was later converted into a lamp store. No one ever bought a lamp. But outside law enforcement began to notice not just the lack of arrests, but the lack of noise. They couldn't wiretap what didn't speak. They couldn't infiltrate what had no meetings. By now, Salvatore ran the whole Barcellonese network like an organ without a conductor. His lieutenants moved by intuition. They showed up at the right dock before instructions ever came. They avoided police zones hours before raids were scheduled. It was invisible harmony, a criminal jazz. The magistrates called it the fog doctrine. You couldn't charge fog. You could only chase it, breathe it, and get sick from it. And then came the Americans. DEA agents, fluent in Neapolitan slang and arrogant from busts in Naples, dropped into Sicily with bravado. They wanted something dramatic, a takedown, a sting. Salvatore just smiled. He let them believe they were close, even fed them stories through an old associate who accidentally mentioned a fake warehouse in Milazzo. The agents stormed the site. They found garlic and a goat named Sinatra. Salvatore celebrated with a small pastry, shared with only one person, a mute child who delivered it with sticky hands and a gap-toothed grin. He didn't need allies. He needed uncertainty. The journalists started calling him the Ghost of Barcelona, but that title missed the point. A ghost is dead. Salvatore was very much alive. He preferred a different metaphor. One night, in a low-lit villa, he offered a rare word to a curious visitor. I'm not a ghost, he said. I'm the wallpaper. The visitor laughed awkwardly, but the room did feel smaller after that. There was one breach, though. A young man, too clever for his own good, decided to shortcut the system. He forged a message, claimed a shipment was cleared. It wasn't. 3 people died because of it. The young man panicked, went into hiding in Reggio Calabria, then Rome. He thought he was safe, until one afternoon he opened a box of oranges. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, was a single cufflink, cut short by exactly 1 centimeter. No name, no note, no knife. But 3 hours later, the young man turned himself in to the police. To everyone's surprise, Salvatore never touched him. That was the punishment. No correction, just silence. And for someone raised in this code, that silence meant exile, shame, a life of never being heard again. He now lives in Belgium, selling insurance. Some say he sleeps with a radio on, tuned to Sicilian stations, waiting for a word that might never come. Many people still believe that invisibility was Salvatore's survival tactic. But what if it was his weapon? Think of it this way. What's harder to kill, a man you can see, or a ritual you don't realize you've inherited? Even now, decades later, the streetlights in Barcelona still flicker twice at 7:13 p.m. Nobody knows why, but everyone closes their shutters anyway, because some wallpaper stays even after the house burns down. The town of Barcelona, Pozzo di Gotto, carries itself like a place that's forgotten how to ask questions. Its rhythm is quiet, its cafes worn smooth by elbows and whisper. Kids still chase soccer balls across cracked cobblestone, but they know, without ever being told, not to play near the corner with the pale blue shutters. That was Salvatore Mancuso's corner. He hadn't lived there in years, but the corner still held its breath, because some presences linger longer than leases. By 1998, the world outside Sicily was heating up. The Colombian cartels were fragmenting, Mexican corridors growing violent, and Eastern European syndicates, especially Albanians and Romanians, were pushing aggressively into Italy's heroin pipeline. For most bosses, this kind of volatility invited panic or greed. Salvatore? He saw opportunity in slippage. He understood the most overlooked truth in underworld commerce. Not every port has to be used. Some just need to be feared. So he made Barcelona look more dangerous than it was, not with shootouts, with whispers. He let rumors bloom like mold, tales of a man who could order an accident from a mountain away. A man who ran a punishment ledger so detailed it included infractions like chewing with mouth open at the Don's table. He fed these stories with just enough detail to make them believable, and just enough silence to make them unforgettable. And the oddest thing, even cops believed them. There were files, half-finished, marked with phrases like, "does not operate in expected mafia structure," "leads through ritual and suggestion," "avoids digital traces," "possibly allergic to electricity." One Carabinieri report simply ended with, "if he's real, we've already lost." But Salvatore was real, and he was watching everything, not from drones or satellites. That wasn't his way. He preferred old things, binoculars, walkie-talkies, rumors traded between gas station attendants. His favorite tool? Pigeons. Carrier pigeons, yes, but not to send messages. He used them as surveillance sensors. He trained them to return from key rooftops. If one went missing, he knew something was wrong. He even named them after operetta characters. There's something deliciously absurd about imagining a mafia strategist whispering to a pigeon named Violetta, until you realize the strategy worked. While police scanned phone records and emails, Salvatore read feathers. One night, a pigeon didn't return. A minor thing on the surface, but Salvatore halted an entire shipment because of it. His people grumbled until the next day, when 3 Guardia di Finanza agents were spotted near the port, disguised as janitors. The shipment resumed a week later, on a different route through a bakery van carrying antique Sicilian pastries. Sometimes paranoia keeps you alive. Other times, it makes you immortal. The real trouble came when an old rival resurfaced. You remember him, don't you? Emilio Lasorda, the butcher from Catania with a fondness for golf clubs and broken kneecaps. He'd once tried to carve out a corner of Messina's logistics game, but was sent packing after a quiet warning and a single dead fish placed in his freezer. Now, in 1998, he returned, leaner, grayer, and partnered with a new crew, a faction of ex-Yugoslav smugglers known for night crossings and disappearing boats. Lasorda thought Mancuso was old, diminished, disconnected. He mistook silence for absence. He mistook grace for weakness. You can guess how that turned out. The night of the clash, there were no bullets, no screams, only a power outage. At precisely 8:42 p.m., half the city went dark. 10 minutes later, every smuggler in Lasorda's crew received a box, delivered silently by scooter boys wearing helmets and no logos. Inside each box, a broken pigeon feather and a torn piece of opera sheet music. No blood, no names. Just implication. By morning, Lasorda had vanished. His boat found drifting miles offshore. His name was never spoken again. But people still remember the opera playing faintly that week from an abandoned house near the water, Verdi's Don Carlo, especially that final aria, where power and death walk side by side. The pigeons returned the next day, all of them. Salvatore fed them crushed walnuts and watched the sunrise from his back garden. He said nothing. But his smile, it had chapters. Around this time, Interpol tried to assemble a profile. They brought in experts, linguists, ethnographers, sociologists. They gathered newspaper clippings, transcribed whispers, even hired a former priest who claimed to have heard Mancuso's voice in confession. The result? A 400-page report that concluded with the phrase, "Salvatore Mancuso is either 5 men or 1 myth. Possibly both." But one tiny footnote, buried deep in the appendix, was more revealing. A journalist from Trapani noted, "In Barcelona, they don't say, 'he was here.' They say, 'he is felt.'" That was Salvatore's victory. He didn't need to be seen. He only needed to haunt architecture, to live in gestures, silences, and rumors. His name never rang out like Corleone or Riina. He didn't buy racehorses or pose with politicians. Instead, he bought absence. He perfected the art of the pause, the unspoken cue, the silent nod that could tilt a city. And still, he wasn't done. In fact, Salvatore was preparing for his most ambitious act yet, to remove himself not just from Barcelona, but from history itself. But how does a man erase even his memory? That answer awaits in the silence between our next words. Barcelona, Pozzo di Gotto, had always been a town that leaned into its rituals. The calendar of saints, the harvest dances, the Tuesday markets, and once a year, no matter the state of the world, it hosted its small, stubborn version of Carnevale, a clatter of costumes, laughter, painted masks, and music echoing down the alleys like distant cannon fire from a forgotten war. In 1999, the year of Salvatore Mancuso's quietest disappearance, the carnival arrived with more color than usual, and with more eyes than ever watching from behind closed shutters. Locals whispered that something was different that year. Not the floats, nor the music. Not even the costumes stitched together from leftover sequins and fading dreams. It was the air, charged, off-tempo, like the town was holding its breath behind the tinsel, because some people knew, not many, but enough. Enough to sense that the shadow over Barcelona had shifted ever so slightly, not vanished, just tilted. 2 weeks before the carnival, a girl named Chiara de Blasi, a volunteer at the town library, found a small envelope lodged between the pages of an overdue book. The book? The Structure of Silence in Mediterranean Societies. The envelope? Unmarked, sealed with wax that smelled faintly of myrrh. Inside was a single sentence typed on an old Olivetti. Every mask eventually returns to the drawer. She brought it to her supervisor, who smiled nervously, thanked her, and slid the note into a drawer without comment. Chiara was never asked to shelve that section again. Meanwhile, Salvatore Mancuso was preparing his exit, not from Sicily, but from visibility. He knew this carnival would be his last true performance, not a farewell in the operatic sense, but something more surgical, less stage, more sleight of hand. For months, his people had worked to orchestrate it. They'd taken over 3 floats under false names. One depicted a giant papier-mâché olive tree, roots snarled in barbed wire, the fruit shaped like surveillance cameras. A silent joke. Another float showed a crumbling amphitheater surrounded by figures in business suits wearing animal masks. A fox, a boar, a pigeon. Each one held a scroll, but the final float, that one no one saw, because it never reached the parade. At precisely 4:47 p.m. on the day of the carnival, as children danced and vendors slung lemon granita into eager hands, a small truck broke down near the edge of the old Jewish quarter. Harmless. The driver muttered, kicked a tire, and waved away curious onlookers. Said he'd wait for his cousin. No one paid attention after that, but at 5 p.m., exactly as the church bell began its 5th slow chime, a quiet operation unfolded around that truck. 3 men approached. All wore gray maintenance uniforms. One held a clipboard, one had a crowbar, and the third carried nothing at all. That man was Salvatore Mancuso. And this was how he walked out of Barcelona forever. No camera caught him. No witness gave a useful description. Only a child later remembered a tall man with very still hands. That was it. And yet, those still hands would cause years of confusion, because shortly after that carnival, things began unraveling. People misplaced memories. Bankers forgot safe codes. Judges postponed hearings indefinitely. A journalist named Luca Bernardi swore he'd seen Salvatore that day, standing in plain view near the mask booth. But his article, The Don's Last Smile, was published, then pulled, then lost in a website migration that erased 5 years of archives. No backups, no reprints, just a headline on a cached search page, like a ghost that knew how to scrub itself clean. But the most curious thing? One of the carnival photographers, An amateur named Pasquale Ferrara snapped a wide crowd shot near Via Roma. When he developed the photo, he noticed a strange blurring in the upper left corner. Not a smudge, not motion blur, just absence, as if something had been there but wasn't allowed to remain. He took it to a technician, who examined the negative and frowned. "This is clean," the man said. "Whatever isn't there was removed before the shutter clicked." Pasquale laughed nervously, made a joke about cursed film stock, and filed the picture away. Years later, that same photo would sell anonymously on an art site for $12,000. Title? The float that wasn't. Back in the real world, arrests started surfacing. Minor figures, accountants, runners, a dock manager who knew too much about containers that never arrived. Each arrest seemed like a victory to local authorities, but anyone paying attention could feel it. They were catching ghosts, empty chairs with names pinned to them, signatures without hands. It became clear Salvatore had dismantled his empire from the inside out, brick by brick, whisper by whisper. He hadn't just fled, he'd evaporated, left no lieutenants, no legacy plan, no second in command to weep over his name. The entire network dissolved, not collapsed, dissolved, as if it had only ever been a story told among reeds by the sea. The only thing left was a package, delivered 6 months later to a magistrate in Palermo. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside, a faded carnival mask, and a note. "Every shadow needs a candle to exist. Blow out the light and you'll find I was never real." Many people still think that note was Mancuso's final message. Others say it was a forgery, a trick to redirect the investigation. So what do you think? Was the man simply clever? Or did he truly learn how to vanish? One thing's certain, no one filled his seat. Barcelona held a silent vote and chose to leave it empty. And as for the festival, the carnival continues, but not with the same fervor. Not since the year of the missing float, when laughter felt like it had a price, and every mask looked like it might be watching you back. The year 2000 arrived not with fireworks, but with a soft confusion in the air around Barcelona Pozzo di Gotto. Y2K didn't break the banks. Planes didn't fall from the sky. But something did change. Something quiet, like the sudden vanishing of a hum you'd only just realized was there. Salvatore Mancuso was now legend, not legend in the mythic sense. Not yet. But in the bureaucratic one, paperwork couldn't quite confirm if he was living or dead. Judges signed documents uncertain whether to use past or present tense. And in the files of Interpol, his case received a subtle shift, from high-value target to archived for intelligence monitoring. But intelligence monitoring what? That was the question that haunted the officers left behind. By then, what remained of Mancuso's network had either gone to ground or melted into legal business. The olive oil company now listed 2 Romanian directors, neither of whom had ever been to Sicily. The shipping firm had rebranded as a renewable logistics venture in Catalonia, and the bank in Luxembourg changed names 4 times in 18 months. Mancuso's touch, if still present, was gloved in air, but beneath that stillness, one particular file continued to stir. The mysterious case of the port of no arrival. It began with a shipping manifest dated April 2000, a container ship from Tunisia due to dock in Milazzo, but it never arrived. No storm, no distress call, just a black dot on maritime radar that blinked out 20 nautical miles off the coast. And yet, 1 week later, a small warehouse near Gioia Tauro was broken into. Nothing was taken, except for the CCTV tapes, and that was where the story regained its pulse. Investigators reviewing port records noted an anomaly. A specific customs official, long retired, had once approved dozens of unscanned shipments under a code that no longer existed. The code, SM33. Someone whispered it might stand for Salvatore Mancuso, 1933, his rumored birth year, but others claimed the code predated him. tracing back to the Barcellonese circles of the 1950s, when smuggling wasn't a crime. It was a trade. Still, the timing made people uneasy, because after years of silence, the network twitched, and then it twitched again. A young prosecutor in Messina, Francesca Lodi, began putting together the fragments. A detail here, a contradiction there. She compiled it all into a report titled Il Fantasma del Nord-Est, the Ghost of the Northeast. Inside, she laid out a chilling hypothesis. Mancuso hadn't disappeared. He had outsourced his absence. In her theory, the disappearance was intentional, yes, but not to vanish into peace. It was to become a concept, one that could be used, cited, feared. Like the silhouette of a gun in a jacket pocket, she wrote. It doesn't matter if it's real, only if people believe it is. Or her report, sadly, was never published, because within 3 months of its submission to internal channels, she was offered a high-level post in Rome, an abrupt elevation that left many suspicious, and then the report, lost in a server migration. The only remaining quote surfaced years later on a political blog that published it under the headline, "The Mafia Learned How to Ghost Itself." And in that quote, one sentence stuck: "Mancuso is not a man, he is a method." Around this time, locals in Barcelona began noticing a man who visited the cemetery every Thursday at dawn. Tall, always in gray. He never stayed long, just enough to place a coin atop a gravestone marked Giuseppe M. No one knew who that was. The stone was otherwise blank. One curious groundskeeper once tried to follow him, but lost sight of the man as he turned a corner behind the crypts. He swore the man never came out, and when he checked the path, it was dry. No footprints, just mist. Elsewhere, pieces kept sliding into view. A banker in Geneva received a Christmas card with no signature, only a Sicilian proverb. The cat does not meow when the door is closed. A journalist in Naples found a flash drive on his windshield containing a PDF titled Instructions for Silence, which included encrypted transcripts of conversations that had never been recorded. And a retired carabiniere in Palermo received a phone call on his birthday. The voice simply said, "Don't miss the 7:03 train, and do not sit alone." He didn't, and that train derailed 30 minutes later. Coincidence? Many people still think that's all it was. Just a coincidence. But when the man was later asked if he recognized the voice, he only said, "It was the quietest voice I ever heard. Like someone whispering through silk." So what do you think? Coincidence or callback? In the spring of 2004, a marble plaque appeared in the old quarter of Barcelona. No one saw who installed it. It simply arrived, embedded into a stone wall that had stood undisturbed for decades. It read, "To those who vanished cleanly, without blood, without noise, only gravity and rumor." Some tourists assumed it was art. Others, a tribute to lost fishermen. But those who had really lived there, they didn't speak of it at all. They just crossed the street, every time, even when the shade was better. And then years later, one more ripple. A law professor in Milan delivered a lecture titled Criminal Legacy Without Inheritors. He cited Mancuso as a case study, proof that power, when carefully unclaimed, becomes eternal, like a whisper written in permanent ink. He said, "You cannot erase it, but you cannot shout it either." He was laughed at, called dramatic, but as his talk went viral, people began asking a question that had once seemed absurd. Did Salvatore Mancuso invent the idea of not being found? Not just escape, but the performance of escape? The suggestion that he might be everywhere, simply because he chose to be nowhere? No one had an answer, and maybe that's exactly what he wanted. In the end, Barcelona went on living. It had to. The fish still needed selling. The bells still rang. The old men still played cards in the square, though they now kept one chair empty, just in case a ghost wanted to join. And the bar where Mancuso used to sit? It got new floors, new lights, but the stool at the corner? It stayed, untouched. By the time 2010 rolled around, The town had adjusted to the idea that Salvatore Mancuso might never return, and yet never really have left. It was easier that way. Easier to keep a place in the mind for someone like him than to admit no one truly understood where he'd gone or what had become of him. After all, what do you do with a man who becomes less real the longer you stare at his shadow? The final traces of his documented presence grew brittle in digital archives, like fading negatives from another century. Photographs were grainy, inconsistently labeled. Some showed him with a full beard, others clean-shaven. A few claimed to depict him as an old man near Malaga, feeding birds by a fountain. But those too were fuzzy, faces more imagined than captured. Everyone had a version of Mancuso. None of them matched. The authorities had long given up, though not officially. His name still hovered on occasional Interpol lists, always noted with an asterisk. Status: unknown. But to most working the files, he was a ghost embedded in a closed circuit. The kind of case junior officers got assigned when their bosses needed quiet. Still, every now and then, someone got curious. Someone tried to thread the needle through the chaos of silent fronts and empty ledgers, and what they found was always the same. Nothing new, just the same old orbit around the same absent core. Mancuso had built something too quiet to collapse, and that perhaps was his greatest gift. Somewhere around 2013, a graduate student researching mafia semiotics published a short paper titled Absence as Authority: The Spectral Power of Salvatore Mancuso. It drew modest interest from academia, but not much else, until someone on a message board for retired Sicilian investigators posted the link with a strange note. She's not wrong. He used to say, "Control is best held in rumor." No one could confirm the quote, but no one doubted it either. By 2015, the name Mancuso had morphed into something entirely other. In high school slang across eastern Sicily, to Mancuso someone meant to vanish from a party without saying goodbye. A local podcast titled An Episode Lessons from the Gentleman Ghost. And on the back wall of a crumbling villa just outside Patti, someone spray-painted a mural. A silhouette in a three-piece suit with no face. Just the words, "Salvatore lives here." Most assumed it was a joke, but not all. A retired clerk who used to work at the courthouse claimed that every time someone passed the mural, the air shifted, like a change in altitude. Even the church, long silent on such secular myths, weighed in discreetly. At a sermon in Lipari, a priest referred obliquely to the great unrepentant who now walks beneath our gaze, not to be caught, but to be remembered. No names were said, but the older parishioners understood. Their heads nodded, slowly, as if acknowledging a truth that had no place in Scripture, yet belonged in the quiet corners of prayer. You see, the thing about Mancuso was never just what he did, it was how he did it, quietly, with control, like breath held underwater. Even when everyone else surfaced gasping, he remained in the depths, unseen and still. In Palermo, an elderly former associate, never named, only whispered about, was reported to have said, while sipping espresso on a rainy afternoon, "People say he ran away, but no, he just stopped walking where they could see." That line made it into a memoir years later, but by then, no one knew if the speaker was real or just part of the folklore Mancuso left behind, because that's what happens with ghosts who build legacies. They become whatever the world needs them to be. In 2018, a forgotten drawer in a provincial library revealed a box of old cassette tapes, labeled only with initials and dates, one of them marked SM 94 and bearing the words "per dopo" for later, was never released publicly, but a librarian who claimed to have listened to it said this: "It wasn't a confession, it was a lesson." He spoke like a man preparing others to disappear, not for escape, but for influence. And then she added, he said the quietest men are the ones most remembered, because their absence leaves room for everyone else's fear. That tape, too, disappeared, or perhaps it never existed. That's the thing with stories like these. They're not meant to be proven, they're meant to echo. And in the present day, the last traces of Mancuso live on only in whispers and speculation. An unregistered yacht docked in Sicily every April for 1 hour. A wire transfer from an inactive Swiss account to a scholarship fund in Agrigento. An anonymous donation to restore a small chapel in Patti. One rumored to be where Mancuso's mother once lit candles for her son. Just flickers, like shadows on old celluloid, fading fast, and yet never fully gone. So where did he go? Some say South America. Others swear he's buried beneath the foundations of a villa he never finished building because he didn't want it to end. But maybe the real answer is this. He went into the legend, into the space between questions, into the long pause after a name is spoken, into the hush of a bar just after closing. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly where he always wanted to be. Not remembered as a monster, not forgiven as a saint, but held in the middle, like a coin standing on its edge, spinning. Still, the streets of Barcelona, Pozzo di Gotto, grow quiet now. The air settles, the shop shutters click into place, and the night rolls down like a soft curtain. Somewhere, a cat shifts on a windowsill. Somewhere, a clock ticks just out of sight. And somewhere else entirely, a name lingers, not loud, not even spoken, just present. Salvatore Mancuso, the shadow of the Barcellonese, not a man in a chair, not a face behind a desk, but something more elusive. A pattern, a silence that meant something. Let your breathing slow with the stillness of this town. Picture the narrow streets, emptied of voices. Picture the soft glow of yellow bulbs hanging from rusted lampposts. The ocean isn't far. It murmurs, low and deep, like a story too tired to finish. The old men have left the square. The last coffee cup has cooled. And the chair at the bar, still untouched, waits without expecting. In this story, not everything ends. Some figures walk out of frame. Others stay behind, quietly, patiently, in the folds of memory and rumor. But you're here now, resting, listening, breathing. So let go of questions for tonight. Let go of answers too. Close your eyes. Drift with the tide. And if you find yourself dreaming of shadows, know that they mean no harm. They're just what's left when the fire dies down.